Roman Dmitry, the youngest son of the Lord of Dmitry. Roman's father started out as a legendary blacksmith in the Kingdom of Cairo. Every single piece of equipment he forged was an absolute masterpiece. When war broke out, Roman's father became the nation's primary weapon supplier, playing a massive role in their victory. Once the war ended, he was granted the title of Baron for his contributions, eventually becoming the lord of these lands. While the Lord of Dmitry had several sons, Roman was the biggest failure of them all. He was dense, reckless, and the servants even whispered behind his back, calling him the fool of the Dmitry family. Roman lived 25 years of utter misery before Baek Joong Hyuk transmigrated into his body. Right after waking up in this new body, the first thing Baek Joong Hyuk, well, let's call him Roman now, decided to do was order his servant to take him to the oldest person living in the territory. There, he listened to the old man recount his father's legendary life. Even though the servant had no idea why his young master suddenly made such a bizarre request, he was, after all, a servant, and a loyal servant always carries out his master's orders. After listening to the stories, Roman got a basic grasp of his new identity. He had no clue why he was reincarnated. Maybe it was the will of the heavens, or perhaps it was a punishment from the gods because he refused to ascend. Either way, since he was given a second chance at life, he was going to make this one count. Right as that thought crossed his mind, a loud shout erupted from the market just a few steps away. "You son of a bitch!" A scrawny youth with reddish-brown hair was being beaten to a pulp by a muscular, bald thug. While throwing punches, the thug kept screaming insults at him. The bystanders were terrified, and absolutely no one dared to step in. Seeing the commotion, Roman's servant hurried ahead to check it out. But the moment he spotted a sharp fang tattoo on the bald guy's shoulder, he flinched. "What's going on here?" Roman asked as he caught up to see what the fuss was about. "Young master, there's trouble. It looks like they're from the Bloodfang gang." Searching through his host's sparse memories, Roman had absolutely no recollection of that name. According to his servant, they were a notorious loan shark syndicate. The Bloodfang gang didn't just operate within the Dmitry family's borders. Their influence stretched across neighboring territories too. It seemed the red-haired kid owed them a fortune, which explained why he was getting pulverized like that. "Let's just pretend we didn't see anything, sir. Nothing good ever comes from getting involved with them." Roman's servant whispered quietly, but when he turned around, his young master had already vanished. Right on cue, Roman stepped forward and barked, "Stop," leaving his servant in a state of sheer panic. The Bloodfang thugs instantly recognized him as the youngest son of the Lord. Yet, far from being intimidated, they burst out laughing. "Well, look at that. A noble thinks he can stick his nose in our business and play hero. Your noble highness can scram now. This is private business." Even though Roman was the Lord's son, these bastards clearly didn't respect him one bit. The servant desperately urged Roman to head back, knowing the Bloodfang gang was a bunch of ruthless, cold-blooded thugs. But with the blood of a peerless martial arts master coursing through his veins, there was no way Roman could just turn a blind eye to injustice. "Hans," he spoke up suddenly, "I'm still not very familiar with the laws around here. So tell me, who exactly is breaking the law here, and what's the penalty for it?" Hans, of course, was his servant's name. The servant was completely thrown off by the question. Although Roman had never been particularly bright, today, after waking up, it was like he had total amnesia. Still, since Roman had asked, Hans had no choice but to explain. Since the red-haired kid owed them money and failed to pay it back on time, he was technically in the wrong. However, the Bloodfang gang had absolutely no right to take matters into their own hands using such brutal violence. And most importantly, they showed blatant disrespect to the youngest son of the Dmitry family. That offense is punishable by death. Under the laws of this territory, those thugs deserve to be executed. Hans gulped nervously as he spoke, especially under the death stares of the Bloodfang thugs. But hearing the explanation only seemed to fuel Roman's appetite for a fight. He casually picked up a dry branch from the side of the road and declared, "Did you hear that? You've broken the laws of this land, and I, Roman Dmitry, the youngest son of Lord Romero Dmitry, will deliver your punishment right here, right now." Even Hans was stunned. His master suddenly looked so incredibly badass. It was like he was a completely different person. Yet, the bald leader and his underlings didn't seem worried at all. "Look, kid, we know you're just some clueless noble who doesn't know how the real world works. But if you keep pushing it, you're gonna force our hand." With that, they began drawing their weapons, clearly ready to give young Master Roman a beating he would never forget. Of course, with the blood of a master warrior flowing through his veins, Roman's thirst for battle was second to none. He didn't even wait, aggressively charging in to strike first. Seeing the young master make such a bold move, the Bloodfangs panicked slightly, drawing their daggers and swinging wildly. Too bad for them. The Roman standing before them was nothing like the useless loser of the past. The dry branch in his hand suddenly became as sharp as a sword. He drove it straight through the throat of their bald leader. Watching this horrifying display, the remaining Bloodfangs lost their minds, reacting like their tails had been stepped on. Screaming in rage, they lunged forward all at once, desperate to gang up on Roman and avenge their fallen comrade. But compared to their bald boss, these guys were absolute jokes. They couldn't even manage to touch a single hair on Roman's head. Roman effortlessly launched a devastating counterattack, leaving Hans completely speechless, his jaw dropping in absolute shock. Good heavens, was this really the worthless young master Roman he had served all these years? Despite being in the middle of a deadly clash, Roman looked completely relaxed. In fact, his mind was actually wandering. He recalled how the first thing he saw upon waking up in this body was Roman's suicide note and a mess of pills scattered across the floor. The Cairo kingdom was a land constantly ravaged by war, and the king had ordered every noble family to send a representative to serve in the military. Roman, who was chosen to represent the Dmitry family, was so utterly terrified of being drafted that he decided to end his own life. To the battle-hardened soul of Baek Joong Hyuk, the original Roman was nothing but a pathetic coward. But regardless of how pathetic the boy's past was, the current master of this body was now Baek Joong Hyuk, the legendary leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect. As long as he held the reins of this body, he would live a life of absolute power and pride, just as he always had under the name Baek Joong Hyuk. While Roman's mind wandered down memory lane, his hands were still busy tearing his enemies apart. He had wiped out almost the entire Bloodfang squad, leaving only one scrawny thug scrambling to escape in pure panic. Unfortunately for him, his speed was no match for the leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect. Roman grabbed him by the hair, completely cutting off any chance of escape. The terrified bastard lost his mind, screaming at the top of his lungs for mercy. In order to whip a lawless syndicate into shape, one must strictly enforce their own brand of justice. "I won't take your life," Roman said calmly, casually snatching the dagger from the thug's trembling hand. "But you still have to pay for your utter disrespect." With that, he yanked the man's head back and plunged the sharp blade directly into his eye. A blood-curdling shriek echoed through the air. Blinded and broken, the scrawny thug writhed on the ground, his body shaking violently from the excruciating pain. The surrounding onlookers who witnessed this brutal display shivered in pure terror, completely frozen by fear. Roman took a deep breath, his voice ringing out crystal clear. "My name is Roman Dmitry. If any of you have a problem with the punishment I just handed down, you are welcome to come find me anytime." In his past life, Baek Joong Hyuk had conquered the peak of the martial arts world through sheer, absolute power. Hundreds, even thousands of warriors who dared to challenge him all met the exact same grim fate. As their blood flowed like rivers, the entire world came to realize that the Heavenly Demon Sect ruled supreme over the martial arts world. Baek Joong Hyuk had always taken immense pride in his legendary achievements. Yet here he was, reborn as Roman, roaming the streets just to clean up a bunch of low-life thugs. Once the job was done, Roman ordered Hans to call the guards to clean up the bloody mess. He stared at his blood-stained hands for a moment, letting out a heavy sigh of disappointment. This body was in absolutely pathetic shape. Its mana pathways were almost non-existent, and what little circulation it had was horribly blocked. Roman realized he needed to gather information about this new world as quickly as possible, and then find a way to reconstruct this weak body. Just then, the red-haired kid stumbled to his feet, crying out, "Young master, thank you for saving my life. Thank you so much." "Don't get the wrong idea. I didn't do this to save you," Roman replied coldly. "The Bloodfangs broke the laws of this territory, and I merely stepped in to hand down their punishment." Just because the boy was severely beaten didn't mean Roman was going to go easy on him. He demanded the kid recount every single detail of what happened, coldly warning him that if he uttered a single lie, his tongue would be ripped right out. With his face battered and swollen, the terrified kid began to explain his dire situation. It turned out his parents were the ones who actually owed money to the Bloodfangs, having taken out a loan to buy farmland. They easily could have paid back the loan after selling their crops, but the Bloodfangs played dirty, destroying their entire harvest so they'd be left completely broke. Only later did the boy find out those bastards did it on purpose because they wanted to force his younger sister into their hands. As he spoke, his unbearable grief and raw anger seemed to overflow. The boy collapsed at Roman's feet, sobbing desperately. "We may be poor, but we've never harmed a single soul. Please, I beg of you, at least save my little sister." Tears welled in his eyes, a desperate mix of rage, sorrow, and raw pleading. Looking into the boy's eyes, Roman felt as if he were staring directly at the Wrath Demon, one of his 4 heavenly kings from his past life. Looking back, the first time he encountered the Wrath Demon, it was in a rundown place, just like this. Memories of his past life began flashing before his eyes. After a long silence, Roman finally spoke up. "What is your name?" "My lord, I am Kevin," the boy replied. "Kevin, I will verify your words in a moment. Rest assured, today's matter will be properly handled by someone." Kevin quickly bowed his head to thank Roman. A sudden wave of familiarity washed over Roman, and a voice deep inside whispered that he might share a long-lasting bond with this kid. Meanwhile, an elegant carriage was slowly making its way into the Dmitry family territory. Inside sat a beautiful blonde lady named Flora, Roman's fiancée. Their marriage had been arranged 1 month ago, and of course, it was strictly a political alliance. Because her family's territory was highly unstable, her father was forced to marry her off to a family with enough power to protect them. Flora fought against it with everything she had. But living in an era where women had no voice, she eventually had no choice but to accept her harsh reality. Naturally, she absolutely hated the idea of spending the rest of her life tied to a family of mere blacksmiths. But since this was the only way to save her father, she swallowed her pride and went along with it. Originally, Flora was supposed to marry the family's second young master, a man with a highly promising future. But those plans took a sudden turn when the family's youngest son, Roman Dmitry, forced her to marry him instead. Before long, the carriage arrived. Flora stepped down, visibly annoyed. To her, Roman was nothing but a spoiled, hedonistic scoundrel. Even though Flora was fully aware of her family's desperate situation, no matter how many times she thought about it, she still felt Roman was completely beneath her. So, the moment they met, the very first thing she said to him was, "Lord Dmitry, I want us to call off this marriage." Flora knew this was a desperate, futile rebellion, but she was determined to fight to the very end. To her utter shock, Roman's face lit up as if he had just hit the jackpot. "Sounds good to me," he replied. Flora couldn't help but gasp in disbelief. What was this? He was the one who had forced her into this marriage, so why did he look like he just won the lottery now that she wanted to call it off? Roman continued, "I have also given this marriage some thought. As the infamous scoundrel of the Dmitry family, I wouldn't dare marry someone of your stature, milady. So, I believe calling off the engagement is the right thing to do." The more Roman spoke, the more stunned Flora became, her shock mixing with a creeping sense of anxiety. Before Flora could even react, Roman was already eager to report the cancellation to his father. She quickly spoke up to stop him. "Wait, I heard you insisted on this marriage because you actually liked me. Now you are willingly calling it off without any conditions, which leaves me a bit confused," Roman asked. "So, do you want me to marry you then?" Flora hesitated. Well, not exactly," Roman chimed in. "Then let's not make things complicated. Since we both agree to cancel the engagement, that settles it." With that, Roman decisively turned on his heel to leave. He even assured her that he would take full responsibility for breaking off the engagement. After all, for someone who already had a terrible reputation, taking the blame for a broken engagement meant absolutely nothing to him. Flora stared at Roman's retreating figure, still in disbelief. She had a feeling he was nothing like the spoiled scoundrel of the rumors. Roman walked straight into the office of his father, Lord Romero. Shortly after, a furious shout echoed from the room. "What did you just say? Break off the engagement?" Roman replied, "Exactly what I just said, father. I have already discussed the matter with Lady Lawrence." Romero's blood pressure skyrocketed. He didn't hesitate to call his youngest son a complete idiot. Even if the rest of the world called Roman a fool, or the scoundrel of the Dmitry family, Romero, as a father, had always tried to secure a good life for him, and Flora was supposed to be a part of that future. An alliance with the Lawrence family was the best way for the Dmitry family to secure a solid foothold among the high-ranking nobility. On top of that, Flora was famous for her beauty. All you had to do was follow through and marry the gorgeous, noble girl you wanted. And yet, you couldn't even manage that one simple task. Romero bellowed right in Roman's face. But this outburst didn't faze him in the slightest. Roman simply bowed his head and calmly apologized. But that only made Lord Romero even angrier. He grabbed a porcelain cup from his desk and hurled it straight at his son's face. Originally, if this marriage had gone smoothly, Romero planned to arrange a comfortable military commission for Roman, but since you called off the wedding, you'll be forced to deploy to the battlefield within 6 months. Do you have anything to say for yourself now? Romero expected his son to react like he used to, shaking in fear at the mere mention of going to war. But now, Roman simply kept his head lowered and calmly replied, "No, father." This only enraged Romero further. "I also heard you picked a fight with the Bloodfang gang. Witnesses at the scene claim you taught those bastards a lesson, but I don't buy it for a second. Someone must have helped you." Romero was certain of this because even he hesitated to mess with a gang like the Bloodfangs. And since Roman was supposedly his useless son who couldn't do a single thing right, Romero demanded that Roman clean up his own mess. He kept yelling about all the trouble Roman had caused, repeatedly making it clear that he was absolutely done cleaning up his son's messes. Romero put on a fierce, intimidating front, but deep down, it was nothing more than an empty threat. He fully expected his youngest son to drop to his knees, sobbing and begging for forgiveness, but to his absolute shock, Roman just calmly replied that he understood and would handle the situation himself. This was probably the single most shocking thing Romero had ever witnessed in his entire life. He said, "This is my own mess, and I can handle it. So, once everything is taken care of, I will be back." With those final words, Roman walked out and slammed the door behind him. Only then did he pull out a handkerchief to wipe away the blood trickling down his forehead. Flora was still waiting outside. She was so stunned that she couldn't even find her voice for a long moment. She blurted out, "Are you out of your mind?" Roman just shot back, "You're still here?" Flora had overheard every single word of Roman's conversation with Romero. What shocked her the most was that Roman had actually picked a fight with the Bloodfang gang, ruthless thugs bold enough to threaten the nobility. His reckless actions were bound to trigger a brutal retaliation from the entire gang, and Flora knew there was no way he could survive without his family's protection. Flora urged him to go back inside and beg Baron Romero for forgiveness, but he just coldly snapped, "Why on earth would I do that?" Flora choked on her words. Before she could say another thing, Roman cut her off. "Lady Flora, you need to remember your place." Honestly, Roman had found Flora annoying from the very beginning. Ever since Hans forced him into an uncomfortable, tight outfit and drenched him in heavy cologne just to welcome her, Roman felt suffocated. He was still adapting to this new world, and he firmly believed an arranged marriage would only bring him headache after headache. But Hans did have a point. Roman knew he shouldn't be rude to a woman who had never personally harmed him. He still wanted to break off the engagement, but he never expected Flora to beat him to the punch, let alone with such an incredibly smug, stuck-up attitude. If she wasn't going to show him any respect, Roman saw absolutely no reason to show her any either. He said, "Well, Lady Flora, you certainly think highly of yourself, don't you? I know exactly where you're coming from. I'm sure you didn't give a damn about my situation when you brought up calling off the engagement. Yet, the moment I agreed to take full responsibility, you started panicking." Roman did all the talking, while Flora just stood there, utterly tongue-tied and flustered. But as far as he was concerned, the second those words left her mouth, she lost any right to question his decisions. He declared, "From this moment on, we are strangers. Mind your own business, and I will mind mine." With that cold dismissal, Roman walked away, leaving Flora standing there in sheer humiliation. The only reason he offered to take the blame was to prevent any messy fallout after calling off the engagement. And honestly, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with Flora Lawrence ever again. Sure, she was beautiful, but he hoped this would be the first and last time their paths crossed. A man like him had way too much on his plate to be worrying about getting married. While Roman wasn't bothered at all, someone back at the estate was having a total meltdown that night. Baron Romero. He was heavily drinking, ignoring the protests of his wife, Liana. The real reason the Baron was so miserable was because of the cup he had hurled at his son's head. He beat himself up, saying, "Liana, I hit Roman again. Back when we were commoners, I used to hit him all the time. But once we became nobles, I swore to myself I'd never put our children through that again." Thanks to Romero keeping that promise, their other children grew up in a peaceful household. But Roman was the wild child, the one who gave Romero the biggest headaches. Yet, he was also the only child who had struggled alongside him during their poorest days. Because of that, the Baron never knew how to handle him. Liana pointed out that while Romero still had a lot to learn as a father, they were still the only ones who could guide their son onto the right path. Roman's reckless behavior had caused her plenty of sleepless nights too. But with a mother's endless patience, Liana truly believed Roman would turn over a new leaf, and she knew Romero would never turn his back on his own flesh and blood. He asked, "Are you talking about the Bloodfang gang?" Liana nodded. She knew her son like the back of her hand. Roman Dmitry was a fiercely proud boy. If he claimed he could handle the Bloodfang gang on his own, he was probably just talking big. As his parents, they couldn't just stand by and watch him get hurt. So Liana urged her husband to send Captain Jonathan to help him. Romero agreed, immediately summoning Jonathan to his office. But in reality, the prideful, big-mouthed boy Liana thought she knew was already gone. When Roman said he could handle it, he meant it. Right now, he was casually strolling through the streets, completely ignoring a frantic Hans. The servant pleaded, "Young master, the Bloodfang gang could come after us at any second. It is way too dangerous for you to be out in the open like this. Please, let's head back." Over the last 2 days, the young master had been acting like a completely different person, leaving Hans utterly exhausted. Of course, no matter how much Hans nagged, Roman didn't care. Roman had no intention of going back anyway. "Hey Hans, when do you think the Bloodfang gang actually gained the kind of power they have now?" he asked out of nowhere. Hans shook his head. He had absolutely no clue, but Roman did. After getting back home, he took some time to dig into this Bloodfang gang. They originally made a name for themselves through sheer brutality, mercilessly slaughtering their rivals. That terrifying reputation spread fear everywhere, making their thugs even more effective at extortion and terror. So what is the catch here? The Bloodfang gang isn't actually that hard to deal with. They are only dangerous because they've managed to make everyone tremble at the mere sight of their blades. That's why Roman wanted to head out today. He wanted to see for himself just how deeply this gang's reign of terror had taken root among the people in his family's territory. After walking around for a while, the two of them stopped at a restaurant called Italy. After ordering a table piled high with food, Roman told Hans to stay behind and enjoy the feast. He wanted to investigate further on his own, knowing it could get too dangerous for the old man. But Hans, who was drooling over the feast just 10 seconds ago, suddenly stood up with absolute resolve. "No way. Even if it's dangerous, I will never let you go out there all on your own, young master." Roman found this both amusing and heartwarming. It seemed Hans was genuinely loyal. Otherwise, he would have never stuck by the side of the original, foolish Roman for so long, right up until his death. But in reality, Hans couldn't really help him right now. In fact, he'd only get in the way if the Bloodfangs decided to ambush Roman. Don't throw your life away for nothing. Just coming out here with me was more than enough. I'll be back soon. Roman then walked out of the restaurant, leaving Hans standing there completely dazed for a long time. He never expected the young master to ever say something so caring, let alone order a massive feast for him to enjoy while waiting. It was like the young master had suddenly grown up. But then, Hans realized something. Losing all appetite, he rushed straight out of the restaurant. Meanwhile, Roman was wandering the streets alone, lost in thought. Over the past few days, he had learned one key thing about the Bloodfangs. Their individual strength wasn't actually that impressive. But because they always move in packs, hunting them all down was going to be tough. After the incident with Kevin, they were definitely keeping a low profile. They were terrified of the consequences of failing to eliminate Roman. Since he couldn't track them down himself, he decided to make them come to him. That was the real reason Roman dragged Hans out today, wandered the streets, and then left him at the restaurant to eat alone. By now, the Bloodfang's scouts had undoubtedly picked up his location. To make things better, today was the scheduled training day for the Dmitry family guards, meaning street patrols were cut down significantly, which meant if the Bloodfangs wanted their revenge on Roman, today was their golden opportunity. His calculations were spot on. After wandering around the streets for a bit, the Bloodfangs finally took the bait. This time, they brought a much larger crowd, and of course, every single one of them was armed to the teeth. Meanwhile, Hans was frantically running back to the Dmitry estate to find Jonathan, the captain of the guards. Even though he had seen Roman take out a whole group of Bloodfangs by himself at the market a few days ago, Hans was still terrified that wandering around alone would get him killed. "Captain, you have to go find young Master Roman right now," Hans gasped, completely out of breath. "He is in grave danger." While Hans's concern was well-meaning, it was highly debatable who was actually the one in danger. Deep in a deserted alley, Roman was warming up by absolutely thrashing the thugs who had come to assassinate him. He started bare-handed, but after snatching a dagger from one of them, he became an unstoppable force. Using his combat experience and cold resolve from his past life, Roman swiftly took down one of the thugs without even blinking. This threw the rest of the assassins into a complete panic. What the hell is going on here? Is this really the Dmitry family fool we heard about? Roman let out a chilling laugh. What are you guys just standing there for? Come on, all of you at once." At the exact same time, Hans was frantically explaining that the young master had gone to fight the Bloodfangs without a single bodyguard. But when Jonathan and his guards heard this, they just burst out laughing, finding the whole thing completely absurd. To them, Roman was known as the weakest, most pathetic guy alive. How on earth could he be picking a fight? "It's the truth. Why would I ever lie to you about something like this?" Hans screamed, his sheer desperation finally making Captain Jonathan hesitate. Coincidentally, Lord Dmitry had also approached him not too long ago about a similar concern. If it were just one person, Jonathan might have brushed it off. But with both of them raising the alarm, he couldn't ignore it. He found it incredibly annoying that the young master kept wandering around looking for trouble when he couldn't even swing a sword. But despite his reluctance, Jonathan ultimately had no choice but to order his men to gear up. "Weapons ready. Let's go save the young master. Don't worry, as long as we're here, they won't lay a single finger on him." Jonathan reassured Hans confidently, though deep down, he was secretly irritated by the endless trouble Roman was causing. Right at that moment, Roman slit the throat of one Bloodfang thug. After a brief second of pure shock, the other two quickly lunged forward, aiming to tear him apart. But their raw aggression was no match for the peerless skills of a master who had spent his entire life surviving the brutal martial arts world. Even when jumped by a gang, Roman remained incredibly calm. In the blink of an eye, he easily took down both of the remaining thugs. He spared one of them, though Roman seemed rather disappointed that they had only sent 3 guys after him. Naturally, he kept the last survivor alive for questioning. Without a shred of mercy, Roman drove his knife straight into the guy's thigh. The excruciating pain was worse than death. Once the thug spiraled into absolute panic, Roman began his interrogation. "Now, first question, who is your leader?" With his experience from his past life, forcing a living, breathing person to talk was child's play for Roman. Once he was done extracting the info from the bastard, Roman headed straight to a tavern on his own. The moment the patrons inside saw Roman, their faces grew pale, especially since he walked in completely drenched in blood. "Welcome, young master." The barkeep greeted him warmly as Roman made his way straight to the counter. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Roman heard every single word, but he simply played deaf. When asked what he wanted to order, Roman replied that he wanted a morning tier, specifically one brewed from the 20s or earlier. "I am sorry, young master, but we do not carry that here. May I suggest another drink instead?" "That works. Just get me something strong. I have things to take care of in the morning, so I need to get a bit drunk." Roman's seemingly nonsensical response immediately caught the attention of everyone in the tavern. That was because it was actually a secret code he had squeezed out of the bald thug earlier. According to him, they received their orders at this tavern after reciting this exact code. The code consisted of 3 specific phrases: morning tear, something strong, and things to take care of in the morning, delivered in that exact sequence. Once Roman delivered the code exactly as instructed, the tavern's atmosphere instantly turned hostile, starting with the barkeep himself. He was the first to draw his blade and order the attack, but he was also the first to hit the floor, knocked cold by a single punch from Roman. The moment their boss hit the deck, every single patron in the tavern drew their weapons and charged at Roman. Anyone else would have been utterly terrified by this sight. Normal patrons scrambled to get out, screaming for the guards to be called. But with the innocent bystanders out of the way, Roman was free to cut loose. Even without a weapon, he easily took out 3 of the bastards in a split second. This instantly made the rest of them hesitate. This was clearly not the cowardly, useless Roman Dmitry they all knew. Sensing their sheer confusion, Roman simply smirked. Of course, he wasn't the old Roman anymore. He was the legendary leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect from his past life. Armed with the greatest martial arts techniques in existence, he had completely overhauled this weak body's physical limits in just a matter of days. Although his current power couldn't compare to his past self, dealing with these low-life pests was still child's play. By the time Roman had finished wiping the floor with the rest of the thugs, the barkeep was finally groaning and trying to crawl back up. "You're up just in time. I just finished taking out the trash. Young master, why on earth are you doing this? Don't play dumb with me. You're the one who attacked me first. Besides, now it's just you and me. There are a few things I'm curious about. So, how about we have a little chat?" The barkeep felt that the person standing in front of him wasn't the Lord's useless son anymore, but a literal demon. He couldn't control his fear, his entire body trembling violently. Not long after, Jonathan led the guards as they burst into the tavern, but the absolute carnage on the floor made it hard for him to keep his composure. What the hell happened here? Don't tell me the young master did all of this? While Jonathan searched the ground floor, his subordinate finished checking the second floor. Only one survivor was left clinging to life up there, and he claimed that Roman had already headed to the Lawrence territory. What? Why would the young master go to Lawrence? Jonathan was completely baffled. Didn't Roman just call off his engagement with Lady Flora? Apparently, the survivor mentioned that the Blood Fang hideout is located in Lawrence. Flashing back to an hour ago, Roman was using extreme force to squeeze the truth out of the barkeep. At first, even after Roman sliced off 2 of his fingers, the man remained stubbornly silent. But this didn't make Roman angry. In fact, it actually made him smile. After all, those who refuse to speak, even when subjected to brutal torture or facing death, are always the ones holding the most valuable secrets. You're wasting your time. Just kill me already. Oh, is that so? Then let us run a little test to see if you can really keep your mouth shut, no matter what I do to you. Brute force would not break a bastard like this, but threatening his own blood certainly would. Roman had already spotted a photograph resting on the table. Judging by the age of the boy standing next to him, it was clearly his son. Roman used the boy as leverage, and just as expected, it worked like a charm. The bald thug got so furious his blood boiled, even though he did not have a single hair left on his head to stand on end. You bastard! A noble like you is actually using my family to threaten me? The bald man screamed in pure rage. Instead of answering, Roman simply picked up the photo and walked closer to him. I recently discovered something incredibly fascinating about the Blood Fang gang. Care to hear it? In truth, Roman had gathered quite a bit of intel over the last few days. He knew these gang members were willing to throw away their lives just for revenge. But they all shared one common thread. None of them had started out as bad people. They had all fallen deep into debt with the Blood Fang, effectively turning them into the gang's slaves. That wretched organization backed people into a corner and took their families hostage, using them as constant leverage. That was exactly why they had so many members willing to die for them. As Roman spoke, the bald man's face grew increasingly pale. He believed that even if Roman knew the truth, it changed absolutely nothing. The Blood Fang would stop at nothing to hunt Roman down and exact their revenge. Hey, you might want to think this through. You should be careful with how you place your bets. Roman suddenly burst into laughter, throwing the picture frame right at the man's feet. The glass shattered into a million pieces. When I said I would take your son's life, I was dead serious. I swear it on the name of Roman Dmitry. He did not hesitate to vividly describe how agonizingly painful the boy's death would be. This pushed the bald thug to the edge, forcing him to make a brutal choice. Should he keep his mouth shut for the Blood Fang and watch his son suffer a gruesome death or spill every piece of information Roman wanted? The final choice was obvious. By the time Jonathan arrived, young Master Roman had already set off for Lawrence. Meanwhile, the Blood Fang headquarters was in absolute chaos after learning their entire branch in Dmitry had been wiped out. What made it incredibly humiliating was that they were beaten by a young master famous for being a complete loser. Someone who did not even have the talent to get into the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship. Where is Roman? The leader demanded. He just left the territory, boss. I think he might have gotten some information from the tavern. Is he alone? Yes, sir. The leader found it hilarious that Roman dared to come here all by himself. To him, it meant Roman was completely underestimating their true strength. He immediately ordered all remaining forces to gather and prepare for battle. We need to take Roman down before the Dmitry family guards get here, he growled. Roman Dmitry, how dare you mess with the Blood Fang gang? Today, I will take your life and hang your corpse right in the middle of the central plaza to restore our gang's fearsome reputation. While Roman was busy dealing with these gangsters, his almost father-in-law, Lord Lawrence, was dealing with a massive headache of his own. He had heard that the Barco family recently borrowed a massive sum of money from the Golden Bank, and the only logical explanation was that they were gearing up for war. On top of that, the royal family seemed to be backing the Barco family, letting them run wild. If war broke out, Lawrence stood absolutely zero chance of winning. The Lawrence family had successfully ruled over this fertile land for generations. Although there were documents proving their ancestors had mortgaged the territory to the Barco family, the Lawrence elders had never accepted it. But debating that now was utterly pointless, since the Barcos were already poised for a fight. The only thing Lord Lawrence could do was resolve never to surrender his land to anyone. Since the Barco family had no intention of compromising, the Lawrences had to do everything in their power to fight back. This was exactly why he had arranged a political marriage with the Dmitry family. At the mention of the name, the nobles' faces lit up. They had completely overlooked this crucial ally. Even though the Dmitry family had humble origins as rough blacksmiths, there was no denying that they were now one of the wealthiest families in the entire Northeast. No matter how much gold the Barkos borrowed, they could never match the wealth of the Dmitry family. With the Dmitrys backing them, Lawrence's position would be secure. That was why the Lord had to send his only daughter to Roman, the man widely known as the fool of the Dmitry family. It is all for the sake of the Lawrence family's future, Lord Lawrence. Please do not blame yourself. Yes, a marriage alliance with the Dmitry family is the right call. Flora overheard their entire conversation from outside. She did not dare to knock, having no idea how to break the news that she had gone ahead and called off the engagement on her own. Her mind was in complete chaos. Part of her felt incredibly guilty for disobeying her father, but another part felt she had made the right choice for her own happiness, her life's happiness. Flora kept pacing back and forth in front of the meeting room door, waiting until she gathered enough courage to step inside and confess everything. Right at that moment, a knight rushed over in a panic. Barely giving Flora a passing nod, he burst straight into the meeting room. "My lord, we have a major crisis." The urgent news he brought was that Jonathan had led his army right up to the gates of Lawrence Castle. However, the knights of House Lawrence flatly refused to open the gates unless Jonathan and his men laid down all their weapons. Jonathan was burning with anxiety, terrified that something might have happened to Lord Romero's precious son. "If anything happens to young Master Roman, I will never forgive you. What a pain. How can we just let you march into our city fully armed?" While the captains on both sides, one atop the wall and one below, were in a tense standoff, another soldier rushed over to report. Lawrence Square was currently in utter chaos because Roman, covered head to toe in blood, was dragging the leader of the Bloodfang gang by the collar right through the center of the square. He completely ignored the man desperately begging for his life. Just moments before, the Bloodfang leader thought this would be a piece of cake. He believed his opponent was nothing more than a brainless noble with more brawn than brains. More importantly, Roman was entirely alone, while his gang had numbers and were armed to the teeth. On top of that, his men were ruthless thugs, completely willing to lay down their lives for the organization. The leader figured it didn't take a genius to see that his side was guaranteed a victory. But as perfect as that plan sounded, reality had other ideas. Roman single-handedly raided the Bloodfang's hideout, swiftly wiping out all the foot soldiers in the blink of an eye. Right before the eyes of the old leader, the slaughter was so shocking that his knees buckled and he couldn't even stand up. As Roman slowly approached him with a terrifyingly cold expression, only one thought raced through his mind. "I'm cooked. I'm absolutely dead." He knew his time was up, but sheer terror paralyzed him, keeping him from moving an inch. Though he desperately wanted to avoid an early grave, he had completely lost control of his own body. Standing before him was a literal god of death, and the outcome was plain to see. Roman beat him to a pulp, leaving him clinging to his very last breath. Then, Roman dragged him straight to the square, tossing him down in the most crowded area for all to see. The once proud Bloodfang leader was now reduced to a pathetic, groveling mess, begging on his knees for mercy. He pleaded that if Roman spared his life, he would do absolutely anything, even become a loyal dog serving him until his dying day. "You'll be my dog?" Roman sneered in response. "You should have said that before you bared your fangs." With that, Roman kicked him viciously once more, slamming his forehead hard against the freezing stone ground. Roman then loudly proclaimed the bastard's true identity to the entire crowd. The townspeople were all too familiar with the cruelty of the Bloodfang. So, hearing Roman expose the leader's crimes filled them with shock and absolute rage. The crimes of the Bloodfang are plain for all to see. Therefore, in front of everyone today, I will tear out this demonic parasite root and stem. The moment he finished speaking, Roman raised his foot. The faint-hearted in the crowd shielded their eyes, unable to watch what was coming next. Jonathan had finally arrived on horseback, but all that was left for him to witness was the mangled, bloody corpse of the gang leader. The soldiers immediately rushed to report the news to Lord Lawrence. They had originally opened the gates to let Roman enter the territory because he was Lady Flora's fiancé. But nobody could have predicted that about 1 hour later, he would drag a bloody, battered man right into the center of the square. After identifying the man as Ben Miles, the leader of the Bloodfang, Roman executed him right in front of the crowd. The elders who were in a meeting with the Lord immediately broke into a frenzy. Their reaction, like everyone else's, was one of utter disbelief. How could a useless loser like Roman Dmitry capture the leader of the Bloodfang all by himself, let alone execute him? Most importantly, Roman had publicly executed someone within Lawrence territory without the Lord's permission. This was a blatant act of defiance, and the clan elders had no intention of letting it slide. But Lord Lawrence saw things differently. The only thing on his mind was the fact that his future son-in-law had wiped out the entire Bloodfang gang all by himself. This piqued the Lord's curiosity, and he demanded to see Roman immediately. Shortly after, Roman was summoned to the meeting room, carrying himself with an incredibly commanding aura. Standing by his side was Jonathan. The moment Lord Lawrence saw the commander, he figured he had his answer. He assumed Roman was only able to take down the Bloodfang thanks to the heavy backing of the Dmitry Guard. "Greetings, Baron Lawrence. I am Roman Dmitry." Roman stood tall and straight, offering his greetings to a man of higher status without bowing his head even a fraction. Lord Lawrence didn't care about such tedious formalities. Instead, he wanted. Let's hear what just happened straight from Roman's mouth specifically. Why he went all the way to Lawrence territory to pull off such a violent stunt. "A few days ago, the Bloodfang gang assaulted an innocent citizen on my territory, so I executed them on the spot." Roman began retelling the story from the moment he met Kevin. Inside, the study doors were closed, while Flora was peeking in from outside, absolutely dying of curiosity. She called a guard over, asking why Roman was here and why on earth he had gone into her father's study. "You don't know, milady?" The guard sighed heavily, then started explaining what had just gone down in the streets. Meanwhile, inside the study, Roman finished explaining exactly how he had hunted down the Bloodfang gang. And the more he spoke, the darker Lord Lawrence's face became. "What I want to know is, who gave you the right to do that? You have absolutely no right to execute anyone on Lawrence territory." "I know," Roman shot back mockingly, "but whether Lord Lawrence could actually handle the Bloodfang gang once and for all is something I highly doubt. Ben Millet, their leader, isn't some mystery man. He's infamous throughout Lawrence for a long list of heinous crimes. He's even been thrown in jail countless times, only to be bailed out every single time." This was all the information Roman had gathered from the tavern owner, which was why he decided to take matters into his own hands. Simply put, he didn't trust the Lawrence family to do the job. Hearing this, Jonathan went completely pale with fear. Roman, however, looked straight at the Baron and asked, "Let me ask you a question, Baron. Did I really do anything wrong?" Lord Lawrence fell silent for a few seconds, then looked up to ask the vassal sitting closest to him, "Do you know this, Ben Millet?" The vassal stammered nervously. "Hitch. He's a known criminal, but I swear I had no idea he was the leader of the Bloodfang gang, my lord." "Fine. I've heard enough. Then there's no need to discuss this any further. None of this would have happened in the first place if the Lawrence family had handled things properly." Deep down, Lord Lawrence knew Roman was right, even if he had overstepped his bounds. He was embarrassed, but there was no valid reason to punish Roman. He had no choice but to dismiss Roman and Jonathan, promising to reward them for their actions later. As the heavy study doors swung open and Roman finally walked out of sight, Lord Lawrence suddenly burst into a hearty fit of laughter. "So that's Roman Dmitry, huh? Kid's got some real backbone." The other noble, however, still wasn't ready to let Roman's overstepping slide, but unfortunately for him, the Baron had already taken a liking to this incredibly bold prospective son-in-law. He was willing to forgive Roman, even if the kid had just insulted him right to his face. In fact, the Baron was so excited that he immediately called Flora in. He wanted to reassure his daughter that her future husband was no fool, so she could finally stop worrying about the marriage. Meanwhile, Roman quietly mounted his horse and followed Jonathan back home. Along the way, Captain Jonathan couldn't help but ask, "Young master, did you really have to mock Baron Lawrence like that? We're lucky we even made it out of there in one piece. What if he had flown into a complete rage?" While everyone else thought he had just committed a massive blunder, Roman remained completely unfazed. He knew his actions only exposed how careless and neglectful the Lawrence family had been in managing their own territory. Besides, judging by the Baron's attitude, he clearly didn't know about the broken engagement yet. There was no way he would punish his own daughter's fiancé. Jonathan got goosebumps. The youngest young master had suddenly become terrifyingly sharp. Not only had Roman gotten incredibly strong, but even barging into Lawrence territory to cause a scene was a completely calculated move. It left Jonathan with the same burning question everyone else had. Was the Roman Dmitry standing before him really the same brainless fool he used to know? As they rode on, Roman fell into deep thought, his mind drifting back to his childhood memories. Being born the son of the heavenly demon meant he was never shielded or loved like normal children. His own father had ruthlessly thrown him into a cruel world where only the strongest survived. He had endured brutal beatings since he was a child, fighting back claw by claw to rise from the absolute bottom of society. By the time the sky turned dark, they had finally arrived back at the Dmitry estate. The first thing Roman did was wash up, scrubbing the foul stench of blood off his skin. He felt completely drained. It seemed that inhabiting Roman's weak body made him exhaust his energy much faster. Still, waking up in this new body had given him quite a few novel experiences. And most of those experiences had to do with the Bloodfang gang. To wipe them out, Roman had crushed everything in his path in the most brutal way possible. Yet, he didn't feel a single shred of regret. Back when he was Baek Joong Hyuk, that was exactly who he was, a man who would tear apart anyone in his way and show zero mercy to those who dared to target him. That was the life he lived, and it wouldn't change just because he was now Roman Dmitry. However, after this incident, Roman decided to lie low for a while. After all, he still hadn't fully figured out the rules of this new world. Besides, his strength right now was also quite a bit weaker than it used to be. While Roman was racking his brain to find a way to boost his strength, a servant outside announced that the Lord wanted to see him. Roman quickly finished his bath, changed, and got ready to meet his father. At the same exact time, in the study, Jonathan was reporting everything he had witnessed in Lawrence to Romero. The Lord could barely believe his ears, because, until now, Roman had always been his black sheep. He was the eldest son, possessing absolutely no impressive talents whatsoever. But back when Romero was just an ordinary blacksmith, Roman was the child who cared about him the most. He had even walked a long distance to the forge just to bring his father a piece of candy, simply because he was worried his dad was working too hard. Because of that, Romero always wanted Roman to have a happy life, spoiling him rotten. But he never expected that very love would end up leading Roman astray. To be honest, he had long since given up all hope for his eldest son. But over the past few days, after hearing that Roman had taken down the Bloodfang gang, that spark of hope, which had seemed completely dead, suddenly flared up once again. Right as they were talking about this, Roman arrived and knocked on the door. Hearing his son's voice, Romero felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He did not care what kind of methods his son had used to fight the Bloodfang gang. As long as Roman had truly achieved something on his own, Romero was willing to do anything for him, to make up for being a failing father. Is that you, Roman? I heard you handled the entire Bloodfang gang all by yourself. Is that true? Roman fell silent, deep in thought. Looking at Romero's expression right now, it was obvious how desperately he wanted a positive answer. If he told the truth, his father would see him in a completely different light. But achievements that exceed expectations like this might come back to bite him one day. That is why, at this stage, Roman wanted to keep his talents hidden. He had originally planned to hide the truth, but childhood memories suddenly came flooding back. Back then, while most children were protected and loved by their parents, he was thrown into a world where only the strongest could survive and rule over everything. He had crawled his way up from the darkest depths to that throne by proving his absolute superiority to everyone. So in this life, Roman wanted to be loved and acknowledged. Ultimately, in the face of Romero's question, he chose to confess his achievement directly. After all, he was the heavenly demon, a man who would never hide his own peerless talent. Right after that, Romero and Jonathan led Roman straight to the guards' training grounds. The soldiers there were completely baffled to see the useless eldest young master suddenly show up at the training field. They were even more confused when Captain Jonathan announced that Roman was here to practice his swordsmanship and asked anyone willing to spar with him to take one step forward. The crowd below collectively swallowed hard, sweating with tension. In their eyes, Roman was nothing but a fool, and nobody wanted to spar with him. If they accidentally went too hard and injured the young master, they might end up losing their heads. As for why Lord Dmitry brought his son here, we have to go back 1 hour ago. That was when Roman firmly stated that he was the one who defeated the Bloodfang gang all by himself. Although this was the answer Romero wanted to hear, it still left him deeply skeptical. How could you possibly defeat the Bloodfang gang? Roman's mind started racing, trying to come up with a highly logical explanation so Romero would not suspect a thing. So, he lied, and said that he had actually been secretly training in swordsmanship this whole time. He even added that he wanted to prove to his father that the guy everyone called the fool of the Dmitry family could actually accomplish something on his own. Roman then laid out the information he had gathered on the Bloodfang gang. He also explained exactly how he had lured their leader out and defeated him. The more Romero listened, the more astonished he became. The story proved that his son had not only made progress in swordsmanship, but had also planned everything out meticulously. On top of that, he was incredibly brave to march right into the enemy's den. Romero remained silent for a long time. He was so used to his eldest son being completely useless. Now that Roman was changing at such a breakneck pace, saying it was impressive was a massive understatement. Romero could only describe the events of the past few days as extraordinary. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Son, can I ask you for a favor?" "Go ahead, father." Lord Dmitry expressed his wish to witness Roman's swordsmanship with his own eyes, to see just how much his son had truly changed. That was exactly why Roman had suddenly shown up at the training grounds. But even after Jonathan asked for the third time, not a single soldier dared to step forward to spar with the young master. Jonathan had a massive headache. He needed to pick someone highly skilled who could easily handle Roman. This was to preserve the knight's reputation while also testing the young master's true skills. Of course, Jonathan himself was the perfect fit for this task. But as the captain of the knights, he could not just draw his sword for a minor spar like this. So instead, Jonathan called out a name. Chris, the vice captain of the Dmitry family knights. The second Chris heard his name, his face turned pale. To say he had a bad impression of Roman would be an understatement. Their very first encounter was last year, when Chris went to deal with a drunkard causing a scene and blocking the entrance of a local restaurant. Normally, it would have been a routine call, if not for the fact that the slurring, trash-throwing drunk was none other than Roman. While trying to stop the chaos, Chris took a hard slap straight to the face, but at that exact moment, he realized this young master had clearly never trained a day in his life. His strength was weaker than an average civilian. It was honestly pathetic. From that moment on, Chris saw Roman as nothing but a useless, space-wasting piece of trash. Yet now, he was being forced to duel him. It was annoying and completely awkward. Chris opened his mouth to object, but Jonathan did not give him a single chance to speak. Young Master Roman, who single-handedly took down 3 Bloodfangs, is a rare talent. To keep this match fair, you are the most suitable opponent here. Knowing his captain's personality, Chris knew he had absolutely no choice but to obey. Reluctantly, he gripped his wooden sword and stepped onto the training field. As Jonathan was about to call the start, Chris suddenly spoke up with a request. "I was taught that once you draw your sword, even in a spar, you must fight as if you are on a real battlefield. And no matter who your opponent is, you must show zero mercy. If you accept this condition, Captain, I would be honored to spar with young Master Roman." Chris's words were dripping with attitude. He was absolutely convinced that Roman could not have wiped out the Bloodfangs on his own. Since he was being forced to spar, Chris wanted to take this opportunity to teach Roman a lesson. Captain Jonathan looked from the Lord to the young master, waiting for Roman's response. But instead of showing any tension, Roman flashed a smug smirk that made Chris boil with rage. Jonathan took the smirk as a green light and signaled both of them to take their stances. Chris had no idea where a weakling like Roman got the nerve to face him in a fight. But looking at Roman's absolute confidence, Chris was actually the one starting to feel a bit uneasy. The moment the signal to start was given, Chris lunged forward with explosive speed. His speed caught the other knights off guard, as Chris was going all out right from the start. On the other side, Roman's eyes suddenly grew incredibly sharp. To Captain Jonathan's shock, Roman cleanly blocked the very first strike. The recoil from the block forced Chris back several steps, a look of pure confusion washing over his face. From the sheer weight of that block to Roman's solid stance, everything about his defense was incredibly steady and powerful. Was this really the same fragile, pathetic young master he used to know? Chris frowned and quickly composed himself. He had no idea how Roman blocked his strike, but right now, nothing but a total beatdown would satisfy him. With that, Chris went on the offensive again. This time, instead of blocking, Roman swiftly sidestepped to the right. Chris's reflexes were impressive, immediately adjusting his sword's trajectory. But in his haste, Chris's movements became sloppy, while Roman remained perfectly calm. Just when Chris thought he had spotted an opening, Roman dodged again, leaving Chris wide open after missing his mark. Roman launched a swift counterattack, and whether by luck or design, the tip of his wooden sword stopped just inches from Chris's face. Terrified, Chris scrambled back, panting heavily. That was way too close. If Roman had leaned in even a fraction of an inch more, Chris would have been hit. The onlookers couldn't hide their sheer amazement. Yet Roman, the center of all the attention, remained completely unfazed. Chris grit his teeth. The Roman standing before him was nothing like the one in his memories. From defense and evasion to counterattacks, there wasn't a single flaw in his execution. At this rate, Chris was genuinely terrified he might lose. He quickly shook the thought off, cursing himself. "What the hell are you thinking, Chris? Your opponent is just the Dmitry family idiot. And because his opponent was Roman, Chris absolutely refused to lose in front of so many people. Before Chris could even steady his nerves to resume, Roman spoke up first. "Well, I guess that is enough of a warm-up." Those words felt like a hard slap to Chris's face. He had been struggling this entire time, and to Roman, it was just a warm-up? The second the words left Roman's mouth, his sword was already in Chris's face. The speed was absolutely terrifying. Chris instinctively raised his sword to block, barely managing to hold his ground. Roman had no intention of letting him catch his breath, immediately unleashing a relentless barrage of attacks. This mind-blowing display left the other knights utterly speechless, while Chris fell deeper and deeper into a desperate struggle. Gritting his teeth, Chris did everything he could just to survive the young master's assault, all while desperately searching for any opening to strike back. Right at that moment, he spotted an opening in Roman's chest. Seizing the opportunity, Chris took one step back to build momentum and charged forward. But to his shock, his sword completely missed, and instead, he saw Roman flashing a smug smile. Right then, Chris realized one thing. Roman had intentionally left himself wide open to bait him into attacking. At this very moment, the sheer terror of losing drove Chris completely mad. The sword in his hand burst with a blinding blue light, causing even Jonathan to scream out in sheer panic. "Chris, stop!" With a massive boom, the training ground shook with unprecedented force, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. Lord Romero instantly panicked, frantically searching for his precious son. But when the smoke and dust cleared, Roman stood there, completely unharmed. What was more, he had actually blocked his opponent's one-star aura attack. The victor had been decided. Completely exhausted, Chris fell flat on his back under Roman's triumphant gaze. To be fair, Chris was by no means weak. When he was appointed as the vice-captain of the Knights, his extremely young age shocked everyone in the order. Chris was also a disciple personally trained by Jonathan. After only 2 years of sword training, he could already sense mana. And it took him only 3.5 years to become a one-star aura knight. There were many rumors circulating about his superb swordsmanship. Those rumors were not wrong. Even Jonathan was extremely proud of his disciple, because Chris not only possessed natural talent, but also had strong drive and work ethic. He believed that the boy would go very far in the future. Yet today, right in front of everyone at the training ground, Chris was humiliatingly defeated by the one everyone called the fool of the Dmitry family. The moment he fell, everyone in the crowd was completely frozen in shock. Romero could not believe his eyes because Jonathan had always praised Chris as the most outstanding 2-star aura knight in all of Dmitry, and Jonathan could believe his eyes even less. Just 1 month ago, Roman was still nothing but a notorious troublemaker. Someone who had only trained for 1 or 2 years could never possess such high-level skills as he just showed, let alone someone who had only trained for 1 month. Looking at the way Roman executed his moves, Jonathan felt that those techniques must have been honed for decades to look that perfect. "My lord, please do not be too shocked, but it seems the young master is a swordsmanship genius." Jonathan spoke his trembling thoughts aloud. Meanwhile, Roman was quietly observing his defeated opponent. He was lying flat on the ground. It was undeniable that Chris knew how to take the initiative and aggressively fight his enemies. His combat focus was also incredibly sharp. At this level, Roman was certain Chris could easily tear the entire Bloodfang gang to shreds, without leaving a single trace behind. No wonder Captain Jonathan was so proud of him. By the standards of the local knights, Chris was already an elite warrior. However, by Roman standards, Chris was still extremely weak. Still, that final 1-star aura strike he unleashed did catch him a bit by surprise. Before Roman could think any further, Romero's hearty laughter pulled him back to reality. It seemed the Lord was basking in absolute joy and pride for his son. After all, Captain Jonathan himself had declared his son a swordsmanship genius. Romero waved his hand, gesturing for Roman to step forward. Now, the Lord fully believed that he had wiped out the Bloodfang gang all by himself, and he wanted to praise his youngest son for achieving his first great milestone in life. Therefore, Romero decided to grant him one wish. Hearing this, Roman was absolutely thrilled. "Father, you said I have to go to the battlefield within the next half a year, right? Since we are no longer on good terms with the Lawrence family." Upon hearing this, Lord Romero immediately assumed that Roman wanted to get out of going to war. "Do you mean you do not want to enlist?" "No, father. I want you to allow me to choose my own men." Romero was stunned. There was still half a year left before deployment. He had assumed his son would try to bargain his way out of it. But instead, he straightforwardly said he wanted to go. Feeling like his son had matured overnight, Romero agreed to his request, and allowed Roman to make his own decisions. Taking advantage of his father's good mood, Roman decided to ask for one more thing, and of course, his father agreed. This made him very satisfied. But there was someone who was definitely not happy, and that someone was Chris. After waking up from being knocked out cold, the first thing he heard was that the Lord had ordered him to teach aura to young Master Roman. Chris protested vehemently, purely because he felt utterly humiliated. Just moments ago, Chris had to use aura just to fight Roman, yet he was still defeated by basic swordsmanship. This made Chris just want to find a hole to crawl into and hide. And now, the Lord wanted him to teach aura to Roman. This was the ultimate insult. At first, Chris protested fiercely, but Jonathan personally made a deal with him. He wanted Chris to teach Roman and find out what made him so different. If he could handle this task, Jonathan would hand over everything to him, my secret techniques with you. Chris was so excited that he jumped to his feet, even though his entire body was aching. What was this? This deal was an absolute steal. If he agreed to the deal, his master would hand over the secrets to becoming an aura knight. Although he had absolutely no idea what Roman's intentions were, the offer was just too tempting, so Chris ultimately had to agree. That night, Roman returned to his room to enjoy his life of luxury. Hans was visibly shocked that the useless young master he served had actually defeated the finest 2-star aura knight in the region. Ever since he defeated Chris, Roman kept hearing people talk about aura, but he didn't quite understand what it was. So he asked Hans about it, but even Hans wasn't too sure. He asked if it was simply the power to utilize mana. Roman fell silent. It seemed that in this world, that energy was called mana. He was absolutely sure that what Chris had unleashed in his final move earlier was a form of surging energy. However, the way people in this world utilize their energy was completely different from Roman's past life. And when it came to what they called aura, Roman felt it wasn't really all that efficient. He had no idea why they used their energy that way, but from that exact moment, Roman had a new ambition: to teach the people of this world how to truly harness the latent power within their own bodies. So, the next morning, Chris went to meet Roman with a fresh wound on his face and a highly reluctant attitude. Before they began training, Chris briefly explained to Roman what aura actually was. Simply put, aura is a way for knights to utilize their mana. While mages store mana in magic spheres to use it, knights store mana throughout their entire bodies. The first person to establish this concept of aura was Emperor Alexandro. Unlike mages who store mana in various objects and forms, he was the first to discover that storing mana inside the body itself would physically enhance it. And aura is simply the act of releasing that stored mana from the body. Mana normally flows throughout the body, and anyone can boost their strength by concentrating and releasing that mana. However, Chris figured that learning about the history of mana wasn't all that important, since only a select chosen few could actually use mana this way. Out of 1,000 people, only one is chosen to become an aura knight, and out of tens of thousands, only one can walk the path of a mage. That's why testing whether you actually have the talent is what matters most. The bare minimum requirement for an aura knight is the ability to sense it. Chris also had to warn Roman beforehand that most people fail at this very step. Even Chris, who was hailed as a sword genius, took half a year just to sense mana. For ordinary people, that process usually takes over a year. The more Chris talked, the more Roman felt like the guy was just bragging about his genius title, and it was starting to make him really impatient. Let's start trying to sense mana. Can you explain to me exactly how you did it? Of course, Chris replied with a spiteful glare in his eyes. He felt Roman was being incredibly smug and arrogant just because he had won a single fight against him. But everyone knew that swordsmanship and mana control were two completely different talents. Chris was practically drooling at the thought of Roman failing miserably and making a total fool of himself. But what Chris didn't expect was that Roman already knew how to sense it long ago. After all, he wasn't the original Roman Dmitry, but Baek Joong Hyuk. In his past life, Roman was already a supreme martial arts master. Because of that, he was already able to accumulate a small amount of mana. However, if he only relied on what he already knew, stagnation and decline would be inevitable. Roman wanted to try and understand how people in this world did things first. So, for now, he obediently followed Chris's instructions. Roman focused with all his might, doing exactly what Chris told him to do. Suddenly, his entire body began to emit a blinding golden glow. When the light became too bright to ignore, Chris opened his eyes and was completely shell-shocked. Roman's aura was so blindingly bright it could literally make someone go blind. Roman slowly opened his eyes. It was just as he thought in this world, the traditional way of utilizing ki was completely useless. Ki, in the Murim world of his past life, would completely purge all impurities from the body, with the ultimate goal of storing Ki within a fully cleansed body. However, this world had a completely different energy system. They concentrated mana and hoped it would flow naturally throughout their body without any restriction or control. The Ki of the Murim world was scarce and rigid, yet incredibly powerful. Meanwhile, the mana of this world was abundant and gentle, making it much easier to release from the body. If he had to compare them, the way people here utilized aura was similar to basic cultivation in the Murim world. But Roman didn't need to waste his breath comparing the two methods. After all, cultivation was meant to make the body stronger. But while that only helps physically, it does nothing to help a practitioner store mana in their body. The truth is, if Roman relies on this world's method of using aura, he'll never reach the absolute peak he achieved in his past life, even if he spent hundreds of years training. What? How? How on earth did you do that? Finally, Chris couldn't hold it in any longer and shrieked. Was that aura that just flared up from you? Since he was making such a racket, Roman finally remembered he wasn't alone. Chris looked utterly devastated, unable to accept the reality. After all, it had taken him nearly 1 whole year just to manifest his own aura. Yet here was Roman, doing it effortlessly on his very first try after a single lesson. Tell me the truth right now. Have you been lying to me this whole time? Were you just pretending you didn't know how to use mana? As Chris spoke, his voice grew louder, thick with anger and resentment. Tears welled up in his eyes as he yelled, as if he had finally found a comforting excuse for his humiliating defeat at Roman's hands yesterday. If you weren't hiding your true strength, none of this makes any sense. It took me 10 whole years just to become a 2-star aura knight. Facing Chris's bitter, resentful outcry, Roman only let out a soft chuckle. This made Chris freeze in disbelief, and the tears started flowing even faster down his face. His fists clenched tightly, looking ready to start a brawl right then and there. To him, Roman's laugh felt like a direct mockery of all his blood, sweat, and tears. Let me ask you something. During all those grueling years of training to reach your goal, did you ever stop to question the very methods you were using? Roman's sudden question hit Chris like a physical slap to the face. What are you trying to say? Roman was suddenly reminded of someone from his past life as Baek Joong Hyuk, the Blood Demon. The Blood Demon was a terrifying figure who once annihilated an entire sect in the blink of an eye, leaving a massive scar on the Murim world. In his previous life, Roman and the Blood Demon had fought a long, brutal war of attrition. In the end, the Blood Demon fell by Roman's hand, and today he saw a glimpse of that very same Blood Demon in Chris. Both had chosen to swallow their pride and endure humiliation just to be guided, casting aside their ego to become stronger. That was the exact moment Roman decided he wanted to help Chris reach new heights. At this point, Chris looked incredibly eager. After all, his intense drive to improve was beyond question. But Roman wasn't the type to spoon-feed anyone. He only wanted to show Chris that sometimes you don't have to blindly follow the traditional paths you've been taught. If I have to spell everything out for you, you won't be any different from when Jonathan was teaching you. But if you're willing to seek the answers yourself, then follow me and watch closely. Chris was stunned. He couldn't grasp how their roles had flipped so fast. He was originally sent here to guide the young master on how to perceive mana, and yet now he was the one who had to follow Roman to learn. Over the next 6 months while we're in the military, watch how I fight different enemies and use that to grow stronger. If you can hold out for 10 years, I guarantee you'll find your answer. That was Roman's final word before they parted ways. That night, Chris sat in his room, lost in deep thought for hours. He recalled the very first time he met Jonathan and the long journey they had shared together. Suddenly, Roman's words began to make sense. After pulling an all-nighter, Chris finally made his decision. Early the next morning, Chris went to Jonathan to share his new path. He wanted to accompany Roman to the battlefield to get stronger. Jonathan didn't press him for reasons. Looking into Chris's eyes, he knew the boy's mind was made up. So, Jonathan gave his approval, but not without leaving Chris with a few parting words. As of today, you are no longer a part of the Dmitry Knights, but I hope that while you're out there, you will still dedicate yourself to protecting the young master. Yes, sir. Thank you, Chris replied firmly. His eyes shone with a steady resolve that brought a sudden wave of relief to Jonathan. It seemed Chris was no longer the little boy who cried his heart out over losing his mother on the battlefield all those years ago. Having been by Chris's side for so long, Jonathan wanted to make sure his student lacked nothing on his journey. So, he decided to take him to select a special, secret weapon before they deployed. While Roman and Chris were preparing their gear for the military draft, out on the streets, Roman's name was slowly spreading through every alleyway. The rumor that Roman had single-handedly wiped out the Bloodfang gang still left many people highly skeptical. But most importantly, the news reached Kevin's ears. While others doubted, Kevin believed every single word of it. After all, he had personally witnessed Roman obliterate a whole squad of Bloodfangs with nothing but a dry tree branch. So he had no doubt that the young master could effortlessly wipe out the entire gang. At that thought, tears suddenly began to stream down Kevin's face. Did he do all that just to keep his promise to me? No, there's no way someone like him would do that for a nobody like me. But he really did wipe out those scumbags, Kevin muttered, quickly wiping away his tears. Kevin, what are you slacking off for? If you want to head home early, keep your head down and work. A harsh shout snapped Kevin back to reality. Today, he was working an extra shift as a laborer to earn some cash. But after hearing about Roman, Kevin couldn't focus on his work anymore. It was as if he had suddenly found his true calling in life. He wanted to be just like Roman, someone strong enough to protect those around him when it mattered most. The Bloodfangs weren't the only threat out there, and Kevin knew he had to get stronger to protect his family. But as for how to actually get stronger, he had no idea. Kevin kept his head down and kept walking, secretly wishing he could meet young Master Roman just one more time. And as luck would have it, fate was on his side. After taking just a few more steps, Kevin heard someone call his name. When he looked up, the person standing right in front of him shocked him so much that he dropped the crate of potatoes in his hands. It was Roman. "Long time no see," Roman said, greeting him first. Kevin was completely flustered. It took him a few seconds to process what was happening before he hastily fell to his knees. "Thank you so much, young Master Roman. Thanks to you, my family managed to survive this whole ordeal." And it was true. Ever since Roman wiped out the Bloodfangs, Kevin's family had finally been able to live in peace. He had even secured this labor job thanks to Hans's help. This only made Kevin more grateful to Roman. Of course, Roman hadn't come today just to make small talk. He wanted to make a deal with Kevin. If Kevin accepted his offer, he would never have to worry about his family's struggles again. He would have a roof over his head, food, and a comfortable life instead of doing this back-breaking labor. But the condition was that Kevin had to serve Roman. If he swore his loyalty, Roman would gladly give him all of those things. Kevin didn't need to think twice. He immediately slammed his head onto the ground, so hard that his forehead began to bleed. But Kevin didn't care about the pain. "I swear my loyalty to you, Master. If you order me to die, I will die. And if you order me to strike, I will cut down anyone, no matter who they are. As long as you protect my family, my life belongs to you." This blood-stained oath instantly reminded Roman of another madman from his past. That man also only took orders from one person. At a single command, he was ready to face an army of hundreds of men, and he would never fall until his mission was complete. Roman watched Kevin closely for a moment, certain that this young man would turn out just like that madman. "All right then, from this moment on, you belong to me." And with that, Kevin was brought back to the Dmitry estate. Hans was tasked with helping him get settled into his new life. From the moment the young man stepped into the mansion, his face was practically beaming. It was probably because his dream of serving Roman had finally come true. After handing Kevin over to Hans, Roman headed to the library. He searched for any book containing information about Aura Knights, which was the main thing on his mind right now. Most of the books contained similar descriptions about the path of an Aura Knight. The first step to becoming a knight is manifesting aura. That is the sign that you have become a 1-star Aura Knight. To reach the rank of a 2-star Aura Knight, which was Chris's current level, one must be able to use their aura to cut through solid steel. In this manner, the intensity and strength of one's aura determines their rank as a knight. Once you become a 3-star Aura Knight, you transcend ordinary limits and receive special treatment from the kingdom. That was Jonathan's current level. The books also mentioned that there is currently a 6-star Aura Knight on the Salamander continent, and there has never been any record of anyone reaching 7 stars. Even among the top 10 greatest knights alive, not all of them have reached the 6-star rank. Reading this made Roman genuinely curious. He wondered just how powerful a 6-star Aura Knight could be, especially since a 2-star knight like Chris felt as weak as an ant to him. And even Jonathan, a 3-star knight, only felt as strong as a second-rate warrior. Roman continued reading. The book stated that those who reach the 6-star rank possess abilities that transcend human limits. The aura flame they can project from their blades extends up to 10 meters. and their destructive power is on a completely different level. Currently, only 12 people are known to have reached the 6-star threshold. They are treated like royalty, regardless of their nationality or race, and are hailed as the 12 Swords of the Continent. Roman's gaze locked onto the title, the 12 Swords of the Continent. Based on all the information he had gathered so far, it seemed they were indeed the strongest on this land. The fact that they could reach such heights without even knowing how to properly utilize true chi was a testament to their raw talent. The books also mention mages, whose power is measured not by stars like knights, but by magic circles. Those who reach the 7-circle rank are granted the title of Archmage. These archmages are practically revered as demigods. They can stride across the battlefield like a walking disaster, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A single spell of theirs can level the earth and blot out the sky. And in large-scale combat, they are far more dangerous than 6-star Aura Knights. Compared to Aura Knights, Roman was much more intrigued by mages, as magic was a power that never existed in the Murim. It looked like he knew exactly what he had to do next. He needed to face these people head-on to figure out what was really going on, even if his own future was still completely up in the air. Not being able to predict what lay ahead only made the situation that much more dangerous. But even with the odds stacked against him, Roman wasn't about to just sit around and do nothing. He wanted to build up enough strength to guarantee a successful life this time around, so he quickly mapped out his next moves. First, he had Hans find him a suitable place to train, and Hans ended up leading him to an old workshop that Romero used to use. Once Romero became a noble, he strictly banned anyone else from setting foot inside, meaning Roman could spend the entire next week training there completely undisturbed. I won't be needing any food or water, but whatever you do, do not let a single soul set foot in here. Remember this clearly. Unless my people are on the brink of death, absolutely no one is allowed to come near me. They were simple instructions, but Hans could feel an incredibly terrifying pressure radiating from his young master. Roman then stepped inside the workshop and shut the door. It looked like Hans had laid down some straw to keep the floor warm. While Roman appreciated the gesture, it actually only disrupted his flow of ki. He cleared the straw aside and sat down on the cold floor to meditate. Up until now, he had only managed to tap into a tiny bit of mana. To perfectly master the techniques of the heavenly demon, he had to start all over again from square one. And that meant purging every single impurity from his body. Focusing intensely, Roman began to channel his energy. Before long, blood started trickling from his 7 orifices. It was agonizing, but Roman forced himself to bear it. He could feel the flow of mana, which should have been coursing through him, completely blocked. This body was clogged with far more impurities than any normal young man's should be. But since he had already expected this, he was fully prepared. Now that he had committed to taking this new life seriously, he had to regain his past strength to protect what was his. And this was only the very first step. 1 week later, Lord Lawrence arrived at the Dmitry estate with his daughter, Flora. He was anxious to see his future son-in-law, but the servants merely told him the young master was busy. Lawrence let out a heavy sigh and sat down. As expected, they aren't happy to see us. I guess we'll just have to wait. Go ahead and sit down, sweetheart. With her father's permission, Flora sat down beside him. Lawrence couldn't help but warn his daughter to watch her tongue. After all, they were here to apologize for their mistakes. Flora looked incredibly pale. In fact, she had been uneasy ever since her father found out she had gone behind his back to call off the engagement with Roman. Even though Flora tried her best to explain herself calmly, she couldn't stop her father from flying into a furious rage. And to think I actually believed you were intelligent. How could you do something so incredibly foolish? Do you have any idea what's happening to our territory right now? In that moment, Lord Lawrence felt utterly disappointed in his daughter. He hadn't wanted to tell her about the massive loan the Barco family had taken out, fearing she wouldn't understand. But now that things had come to this, Lord Lawrence had to lay it out straight. The Barco family was preparing for war, and aligning with the wealthy Dmitry clan was their only shot at survival. Yet the daughter he trusted most had ruined everything. Is our family really that weak, father? Can't we survive even without the Dmitrys? Flora tried to salvage the situation, but her father could only shake his head in defeat. It's true that we could hold our own if we were only fighting the Barcos, but the royal family has already approved their shady deals and even loaned them money without asking for any collateral. This proves it's no longer just a war between two families. My dear, the forces backing the Barcos are the ones who want to see us fall. Now that they have a perfect excuse, they'll stop at nothing to orchestrate our downfall and take everything. Our land, our honor, and even you, the prized flower of the Lawrence family. Confronted with the brutal truth, Flora couldn't find the words to argue. Deep down, she had always been somewhat aware of their family's dire situation and her father's reasons for proposing the marriage. Yet, she had chosen to ignore it all out of pure selfishness. As she rode in the carriage with her father to the Dmitry estate, Flora forced herself to snap out of her foolish delusions. If she rejected this marriage with Roman, she would end up losing absolutely everything anyway. And that was why they found themselves waiting at the Dmitry mansion on the final day of Roman's seclusion. The two of them had arrived incredibly early. Early morning turned into dusk, but Roman still hadn't stepped out. Hans was growing incredibly anxious. Although the Lawrence father and daughter looked displeased, Hans didn't dare go against his young master's wishes, as Roman had given him very strict instructions. He kept pacing back and forth until, finally, he heard the creak of a door opening. Hans was absolutely thrilled, but Roman's appearance as he stepped out completely shocked him. Meanwhile, after waiting for half a day and drinking cup after cup of tea, Viscount Lawrence finally lost his patience. Even though he had come to apologize, sitting and waiting in vain like this made him feel completely humiliated. Lord Lawrence tried clenching his fists to stay calm, but they wouldn't stop shaking. The veins on his forehead were throbbing violently. After a brief struggle with his thoughts, Lord Lawrence stood up abruptly and marched straight to Lord Dmitry's study. Roman's father was busy handling matters at that moment. When he heard footsteps approaching, he didn't even bother to look up. The study door burst open, and Viscount Lawrence stormed in like a whirlwind, furious. "Baron Dmitry, what on earth are you doing to keep your guests waiting this long? If you are unhappy with us, you should have just sent us away. I never expected you to be this heartless, Baron Dmitry." Facing Viscount Lawrence's demands, Romero remained silent for a few seconds before calmly dipping his quill into the inkwell. "I understand your anger, but did you make an appointment before showing up here? I know it was wrong of us to show up unannounced, but we did state our intention to meet your son a week ago, and we had no choice but to come here ourselves, because he rejected our request and then vanished without a trace." It was true that a week ago, Viscount Lawrence had sent a letter requesting a meeting with Roman, but received no reply. Growing desperate, he had no choice but to bring his daughter along and show up unannounced. As a result, they had to wait for half a day without a single word of explanation. Lord Lawrence felt terribly insulted, believing that Lord Dmitry should have just rejected their visit from the very beginning. Viscount Lawrence's attitude became increasingly hostile. He ranted relentlessly, as if dumping a bucket of cold water right over Baron Dmitry's head. "Did you come all this way just to tell me you are angry about waiting for half a day?" After a moment of silence, Romero asked. His chilling tone made both Lawrence and his daughter swallow hard in tension. Romero was no fool. On the day Flora visited the Dmitry estate, Roman had taken the initiative to ask him to call off the engagement. Though he didn't ask for the reason, even a 3-year-old child could figure out what had happened. Lord Dmitry guessed immediately that Lady Flora was the sole reason Roman wanted to break off this arranged marriage. What angered him the most was that Viscount Lawrence was the one who pushed for this political marriage in the first place. Yet, the person who actively demanded to call it off was his precious daughter. This was nothing short of a direct slap to Romero's face. To be precise, the Dmitry family was the one who had been deeply insulted first. And yet, Viscount Lawrence, you still think your anger is justified just because you had to wait for a little while? At this point, Romero could no longer hold back his rage. He slammed his hand on the desk, sending the inkwell flying and spilling ink everywhere. "We did not want to meet you in the first place. Yet you forget your own mistakes and dare to come here to complain?" The room fell dead silent. Flora did not even dare to breathe, while Viscount Lawrence began to realize he had made a terrible move. Since his guest remained silent, Romero continued to speak. He brought up how about a month ago, the Barco family had contacted him for an alliance marriage with the Dmitry clan, right after the Lawrence family had made their proposal. They promised to connect the Dmitry family with the royal court and share a portion of the Lawrence territory once they successfully seized it, but Romero refused. Even though an alliance with the Barcos was far more lucrative, he turned it down for one simple reason. The Dmitry family already had plenty of money. They had solid power to make decisions on their own terms. And more importantly, it was because his son liked the flower of the Lawrence family, Lady Flora, that Romero decided to stand against the Barco family. Yet, shortly after the marriage was settled, Lady Flora rushed over here and threw a bucket of cold water on us by calling off the engagement with my son. As Romero spoke, Viscount Lawrence could not stop blaming himself for losing his temper and making such a massive mistake. Back in her childhood days at the academy, It was a place where noble children gathered to learn and build connections. Back then, there was a family so insignificant that everyone questioned their very worth, which really caught Flora's attention. That was the child of the Joel family. In a world where kids grew up believing they were born as precious treasures, the young master of the Joel family was the sole exception. One day, he made a minor mistake. If it had been any other child from a prestigious noble family, it wouldn't have mattered at all. But because he was the Joel family's heir, the academy went as far as holding a disciplinary committee just for him. When Flora saw the teachers scolding Joel for his tiny mistake, a man who seemed to be his father showed up and apologized. He bowed his head low, begging for forgiveness and promising to discipline his son. The other children snickered at the Joels through the glass window, and Flora was the only one who felt truly sorry for them. Years had passed, and now she and Viscount Lawrence found themselves in the exact same situation as Joel back then. This ironic twist of fate felt utterly ridiculous to Flora. Beside her, her father was bowing lower and lower, apologizing to Baron Dmitry. Flora used to think young Master Joel was incredibly weak back then, and now, her own family was no different. Flora had kept her mouth shut the entire time, but just as she opened her mouth to speak up for her father, the door behind them swung wide open. The servant announced that young Master Roman had arrived, and his new appearance left Flora completely speechless. After a week of training, Roman seemed to have grown quite a bit taller. His brown hair had turned a silvery purple, and his eyes had become a deep shade of violet. He clearly had a much colder aura now, but there was no denying he was incredibly handsome. "I have come to see you, father. Are you finished with your training?" Even Baron Dmitry was completely taken aback by his son's massive transformation. But his glow-up, which looked like a successful plastic surgery, wasn't nearly as important as the pressing issue at hand. Romero wanted his son to be personally involved in discussing the marriage. Since Roman had changed, he was ready to support his decision, both as a father and as the head of the Dmitry family. "I understand, father," Roman replied indifferently, before casting a glance at Flora that made her extremely tense. Having lived a whole lifetime before, Roman was smart enough to understand what the alliance between the two families would lead to. With the Barco family threatening the Lawrence territory, the power of the Dmitry house would guarantee Lawrence a way to survive. When Roman said this, Romero thought his son had changed his mind and wanted to proceed with the marriage, but Roman's expression remained as cold as ever. Pulling out an elegant handkerchief, he wiped up the ink that had spilled from his father's earlier desk, slamming outburst as he spoke. "The very first day I met Flora Lawrence, my thoughts on this marriage changed. She and her father must have heard the rumors about the Dmitry family idiot, and she probably thought she couldn't marry someone like that." Roman's words were calm, yet they pierced through the last shreds of Flora's composure like a knife. His stance was firm. No matter how others judged Roman Dmitry, he hoped to spend his life with someone who would only judge him after getting to know him in person. Flora had failed to do that, so Roman still wanted to call off this unwanted marriage. As soon as Roman finished speaking, the entire room seemed to sink into a heavy, gloomy silence. The most desperate person in the room was undoubtedly Viscount Lawrence, as this arranged marriage was the last card he had to save his family. But his daughter had offended the Dmitry family, and now it was highly unlikely any other noble house would ever agree to join hands with them. His family would have to face the Barcos and the forces backing them with whatever meager resources they had left. This fight was already tough enough, but if the Dmitrys allied with the Barco family, the Lawrences would be completely doomed. To prevent that from happening, Viscount Lawrence decided to swallow his pride completely, bowing 90 degrees as he offered his final apology. He wanted to offer a sum of money to make up for the mistake his daughter had made. But as the owner of an incredibly wealthy iron mine, Romero didn't care about a measly sum of money at all. Besides, Romero knew exactly why Viscount Lawrence was offering this compensation. "There is no need for you to do that. As the head of the Dmitry family, I will not bring up your choice when dealing with any issues that may arise in the future. We will announce to the public that Flora Lawrence has called off the engagement due to personal reasons. And by doing so, we will have no reason to ally with the Barco family either." Hearing this, Viscount Lawrence let out a deep sigh of relief. After thanking Romero, the father and daughter took their leave. Before stepping out of the study, Viscount Lawrence couldn't help but steal one last look at his almost son-in-law. If he had known the boy's true worth sooner, he would have been much more careful in telling Flora to preserve this marriage. Even though he knew he had made a grave mistake, Lawrence could no longer salvage the situation. It was only after the study door had been closed for a while that Baron Dmitry finally voiced his sheer confusion. He wanted to know what on earth had happened to his son over the past week, and why he had returned looking like an entirely different person. Honestly, it's no surprise that anyone seeing Roman like this would be absolutely shocked. For one whole week, he locked himself in the warehouse, training his body by purging every single internal impurity. This was all to enter the mortal state, which required a series of physical preparations to eventually become the heavenly demon. Although this process wasn't considered all that impressive back in the Murim world, things were different here. With the absolute energy flowing naturally throughout this world, clearing the impurities in Roman's body was of the utmost importance. Even when building the basic foundation for this new body, it would have a massive impact. The drastic changes in Roman's physical appearance were the clearest proof that he was now a completely different person. But explaining all of this to Romero was going to be pretty difficult. So, Roman avoided the topic by claiming he couldn't quite remember all the details of his training, but he believed that energy had finally started to circulate throughout his body. Hearing this, Romero was completely dumbfounded. Mana circulation was a phenomenon where natural energy flows through the body to drastically boost one's physical capabilities, and it was a feat only a select few could achieve. Yet Roman, the guy everyone used to call the idiot of the Dmitry family, had actually pulled it off. His growth was starting to exceed Romero's wildest expectations, making the man a bit skeptical. But even so, it didn't change the fact that Roman was his son. So, Romero chose to keep believing in him and support him. Never forget that your name is Roman Dmitry, and I am Romero Dmitry, your father. I will make sure you have everything you need. These were just simple words, but they moved Roman deeply. In his past life, his father had been cold and overbearing, but here was Romero, protecting and supporting Roman unconditionally. This feeling was honestly not bad at all. Once their conversation was over, Roman left the study. To his surprise, Flora was still waiting outside, looking quite hesitant. But the young lady of House Lawrence wasn't there to beg him to reconsider the marriage. She just wanted to offer Roman a belated apology for judging him too quickly and causing so much trouble for both of their families. From start to finish, Roman didn't feel a single thing for this beautiful lady, nor did he have any intention of going through with the marriage, so he had no use for her apology. But Flora kept following him, eager to explain why she had unilaterally demanded to call off the engagement. During a social gathering hosted by the nobles of the Northeast, Flora had heard rumors about her engagement to a member of the Dmitry family. It wouldn't have been a big deal if the rumors hadn't spread like wildfire and taken a nasty turn. She could tolerate marrying a useless playboy, but the deal breaker was that the rumors claimed young Master Roman was a drug addict. Flora felt there was no way she could spend the rest of her life with someone like that. As she confessed this, Roman's expression, he remained utterly cold. No matter her reasons, nothing could change the current relationship between them. Roman then walked away coldly, but Flora's words had actually caught his attention. Drugs were something that ruined both a person's body and mind. The original Roman Dmitry had a body as weak as a wet noodle, which made a lot of sense, if he really had been an addict. But ever since crossing over to this world, Roman hadn't felt any trace of drugs flowing through his veins. Even though he did show signs of using drugs to end his own life, those toxins had completely left his body after he finished his 1-week physical refinement. Realizing that overthinking it wouldn't bring any answers, Roman decided to ask Hans directly about his concerns. "Hey, have you ever seen me use drugs? Or was there ever a time you suspected me of doing so?" Hearing this, Hans flinched at his young master's sudden question. Roman assured him he wasn't joking. Of course, he couldn't just blurt out that he was a reincarnated soul trying to dig into the past of this body's original owner. So, Roman made an excuse, saying he was simply reflecting on his past actions from an outsider's perspective. Hans had no idea why his young master had suddenly experienced such a change of heart. But thinking back, even though he had never witnessed it with his own eyes, there was indeed a time when Hans found Roman's behavior quite strange. It happened about 1 month ago, right after Roman returned from a social party. Back then, he was in a very bizarre state, looking both guilty and terrified. For some time after that, Roman seemed to lose all will to live and locked himself in his room, demanding that Hans bring him large amounts of alcohol every single night. This was what made Hans suspect the young master might be using drugs. Roman, listen closely. Connecting this with what Flora had just said, he also started to have his doubts. Hans, do you know who hosted that party? It was the eldest son of the Barco family, young master. His name is Anthony Barco. This makes things even more suspicious. The original Roman Dmitry had been arranged to marry Flora Lawrence, but after attending a social gathering hosted by the Barco family, his mental state suddenly fell apart. In the end, he chose to take his own life. The real reason why Roman chose to end his own life kept gnawing at Baek Joong Hyuk's mind. In his suicide note, the only thing he mentioned was his absolute terror of going to the battlefield. But at that time, he was already betrothed to Flora. And in reality, there were plenty of ways for nobles to avoid military service once they got married. So did Roman really choose to end his life just because he was scared of war? That simply didn't make any sense. Hans, were Anthony Barco and I really that close? Roman asked, fishing for information. Hans shook his head. You two weren't close at all, but ever since you got engaged to Flora, Anthony seemed to show a sudden, intense interest in you. And that made perfect sense. Because a political marriage between the Dmitry and Lawrence families was a massive roadblock for the Barco family, who desperately wanted to take over the Lawrence territory. And the easiest way to deal with that obstacle was to destroy the marriage. They probably did whatever dirty tricks they could to Roman, which eventually pushed him to take his own life. As Hans said this, he suddenly remembered something else. A few days ago, the Barco family sent an invitation to a party, but since Roman was in closed-door cultivation, Hans didn't know what to do with it. Hearing this, Roman couldn't help but admire the sheer shamelessness of the Barco family. They failed to finish him off the first time, so now they were coming back for a second try. But as luck would have it, Roman was never the type to back down from a fight. The party was scheduled in 2 weeks, and Roman ordered Hans to send an RSVP right away, stating that he would definitely be there. The next morning, Hans brought Kevin to see Roman, and made sure to warn the boy not to look too shocked when he saw the young master's new appearance. But even with the warning, Kevin was completely stunned by his striking looks for a few seconds. It wasn't just Roman's physical change, his entire aura had reached a whole new level, leaving Kevin utterly speechless. Seeing Kevin arrive, Roman paused his sword practice and took the initiative to speak first, asking how he had been lately. "Oh yes, young master, I've gotten used to everything here," Kevin replied, sounding a bit tense. "But I keep asking myself, what exactly is my role here? I'm not sure if there's anything of value I can actually do for you." This was the very question that had been weighing on Kevin's mind all week. Before, he had sworn that his life would belong to Roman if the young master kept his family safe. But after moving into the Dmitry estate, Kevin started to doubt whether an ordinary person like him had anything to offer at all. Coincidentally, that was exactly why Roman had called Kevin over today. Today was the day Roman would decide what purpose Kevin would serve in his life. However, he didn't want to force a path on him. Instead, Roman gave Kevin 2 choices. First, if Kevin was afraid of wielding a sword and shedding blood, he didn't have to become Roman's blade on the battlefield. Instead, he could shadow Hans and learn how to be a perfect servant, spending his days working safely inside the estate. Second, Kevin could choose to become Roman's sword and protect his master. This was a steep hill to climb, considering he had never even touched a sword before. On top of that, if he chose to walk this path, Roman would have to test his resolve using brutal, torturous training. The first method was bone crushing. Just like the name suggested, it was a process of extreme agony, making it feel as if his bones and muscles were being ground to dust. If he could endure that excruciating pain, Kevin would prove he was worthy and capable of standing by Roman's side. The second method was for Kevin to take Roman's sword and sever his own limbs. By pushing himself through such self-inflicted, ultimate physical agony, a hidden power would be unleashed. Kevin would gain unparalleled strength and speed that no one could match. In his past life, the Mad Demon had risen from a mere street wanderer to one of the 4 heavenly kings through sheer willpower alone. And now, Roman wanted to use that very same method to test Kevin, who reminded him so much of the Mad Demon. "No matter what you choose, I will make sure you are of use to me. How I use you is entirely up to your own decision," Roman's words echoed, but Kevin's ears were ringing. Standing before this life-altering and highly dangerous decision, a flood of memories from his childhood flashed through Kevin's mind. Kevin was born in a dilapidated shack near Castle Dmitry that looked ready to collapse at any second. As a young boy, he had to follow his father around, doing any odd job just to survive. Because of that, as he grew up, Kevin learned how to do almost anything. Yet, his life remained completely stagnant, and he struggled terribly just to survive the constant bullying of those stronger than him, like the Bloodfang gang. He had long accepted that this was simply the harsh reality for the weak. That was why he would never let himself forget that fateful day. The day young Master Roman Dmitry used nothing but a dry tree branch to utterly crush the entire Bloodfang gang in the middle of the street. That mind-blowing show of strength had completely captured Kevin's soul. With trembling hands, he reached down and picked up the sword. Kevin couldn't understand how chopping off his own limbs would actually help him, but as long as it made him stronger, helped him escape his miserable life, and gave him power like Roman's, he was willing to do it. Looking at the gleaming blade in his hand, Kevin felt extremely tense. To say he wasn't terrified would be a flat-out lie. He took a deep breath, summoned every ounce of courage he had, and raised the sword. "I will do it." Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone was pacing back and forth, completely losing his mind. It was Chris. He had decided to leave the Night Order, just to follow the young master. But Roman responded to this by disappearing for weeks, leaving Chris completely on edge. Today, the moment he ran into Hans, Chris eagerly cornered him to ask where the young master was. That's when he found out Roman was talking to Kevin, and had strictly ordered that no one be allowed inside. Chris was in a foul mood, feeling like a favorite concubine who had suddenly fallen out of favor. Who the hell was this Kevin guy anyway? Just then, a blood-curdling scream from Kevin echoed from the training grounds. Blood splattered across the blade as he collapsed to the ground. That night, Hans went into a complete panic when he saw the blood-soaked sword. "Young master, when did you get hurt?" But Roman calmly replied, "That is nothing to worry about. I'm fine, because that isn't my blood." It was the first time Hans had ever seen such a deeply satisfied smile on his young master's face. Of course, Roman didn't possess some miraculous power that could regrow Kevin's arm, so he was never actually going to let the boy mutilate himself. The exact moment Kevin was about to strike, Roman used the art of the illusory demon, dragging him into a vivid illusion. Inside this illusion, everything felt completely real, even the agonizing pain. But in reality, nothing had actually happened to his physical body. Still, Roman had witnessed Kevin's sheer, terrifying determination firsthand. The kid had actually swung the blade, letting it nick his wrist before the illusion took over. If Roman's spell had been just a split second slower or a fraction weaker, Kevin would have actually chopped his own arm off. But through this extreme test, the boy had proven his absolute worth. Roman now held two highly valuable pieces in his hand: Kevin and Chris. There were only 2 weeks left until the banquet, and only 6 months before war broke out. He had to make the most of this time to teach them as much as possible. The following day, once Kevin had finally pulled himself together, Roman began teaching him the mana amplification technique. This wasn't some basic technique, it was the very art once used by the demon of wrath. While incredibly powerful, it was also highly dangerous, capable of slowly eating away at the user's soul. Anyone who mastered this mana amplification could unleash devastating power while enduring excruciating pain. And even if their limbs were hacked off, they could never let their will waver. That was exactly why Roman put Kevin through such a brutal test the day before. In his past life, the demon of wrath had been Roman's right-hand man. He had mastered this technique while enduring absolute agony. Now, Roman had finally found someone just like him, this kid, Kevin. But before teaching him how to amplify his mana, Roman had to give him a serious warning. As your mastery over this technique grows, the pain you endure will only become more agonizing. Of course, Roman had a very specific reason for teaching Kevin this method. It was the absolute fastest way to train a kid who didn't even understand the bare basics of mana. If Kevin could master this mana amplification, he would easily have the strength to protect everything dear to him. Hearing those words, Kevin's eyes lit up with hope. To him, Roman was practically a savior descended from the heavens. He hadn't just saved him from brutal beatings. He had wiped out the blood fangs, protected his family, and was now teaching him incredibly powerful techniques. Kevin's gratitude was beyond words, but it also left him with a nagging doubt. "Young master, why do you trust me so much? I swore to give my life to you, but I haven't proven anything yet. What if I just run away once I learn this technique?" It was a completely natural question for Kevin to ask, but Roman didn't give him an answer. Instead, he simply told him to rest for one more day before their official training began. Looking back, the demon of wrath had asked him the exact same question in his past life, and he hadn't answered then, either. Roman knew without a doubt that Kevin would never betray him, because just like the demon of wrath, once they tasted true power, they would realize that betraying the heavenly demon carried a price far too devastating to pay. The next morning, their very first training session began. But strangely, Roman didn't teach Kevin anything legendary or advanced. Instead, he only walked him through the absolute basics of swordsmanship. This did not sit well with Chris at all. He had no idea where this random kid had crawled out from. But now he was hogging all of the young master's attention. Roman wouldn't even look in Chris's direction, let alone teach him anything. Chris had followed Roman, expecting to grow strong fast, but being treated like complete air was starting to wear on his patience. Man, swinging a sword next to my old master was starting to look better. Should I just go back and beg him to take me in again? Chris let out a frustrated stretch, but remembering Roman's earlier words, he decided it was better to suck it up and wait just a little longer. So, swallowing his pride, Chris showed up the next day to watch Roman train Kevin, and he did it the day after that. And the day after that, for weeks on end. Over the next few days, Roman showed absolutely no signs of teaching Chris anything. Finally, Chris just snapped. Master Roman, I decided to follow you 2 weeks ago. The first week was completely wasted because you were shut away in training. And then you just brushed me aside to train this kid. If you are doing this because I was rude to you at first, I sincerely apologize. Please, just teach me too. I know I can learn absolutely anything you throw at me. Chris poured out all his frustration in a desperate rant, but Roman did not budge in the slightest. Did I not tell you already? Just watch me and learn. Chris stood there, his jaw completely dropping in shock. Roman had indeed said that, but Chris never thought he actually meant it literally. Had Chris really been ignored for the past 2 weeks just because Roman expected him to learn by simply watching? Sensing Chris's utter confusion, Roman did not even wait for him to speak before offering an explanation. I know everyone has a different way of learning. Take Kevin, for instance. He knew absolutely nothing. So until he reaches a certain level, I have to guide him step by step, from start to finish. But you, Chris, are different. No matter what I teach you, you would only force yourself to memorize it like a robot, instead of actually trying to understand it. So you just want me to keep watching you? No, Roman replied, before tossing a wooden sword straight at Chris. While Chris was still dazed, Roman dropped an even bigger bombshell. He demanded that Chris fight a match against Kevin. This demand left both of them completely speechless. For Chris, this was nothing short of a slap in the face. After all, Chris was already a 2-star aura knight, while Kevin was just a kid who knew absolutely nothing about swordsmanship or mana. In this match, even though Kevin is your opponent, I will be the one directing him on how to defeat you. For all intents and purposes, Kevin will be acting as my clone. If you still think you are right after this fight, I will personally train you myself. Chris desperately tried to hold back his rising anger. A string of bleeped-out curse words flew through Chris's head, all directed at Roman, of course. But determined to prove himself, he ultimately accepted the challenge. Fine, then. Right here and now, I will prove to you that I am not someone you can just look down on. And with that, a 2-star aura knight and a mere novice apprentice stepped onto the training field. Roman stood right behind Kevin. Unsurprisingly, the moment the kid stepped up, his knees started shaking like crazy from pure nerves. Roman chose his words carefully to encourage him. I know you are at a massive disadvantage, but if you lose this fight, what do you actually lose? Nothing, sir, Kevin muttered. There are countless people in this world stronger than you. The Bloodfang gang, who used brute force to terrorize your family, and Chris, who is desperate to defeat you just to win my approval, are no different. So, do you plan on just standing there and taking the beating every single time? Roman's words hit Kevin right where it hurt, instantly flipping his battle switch. Kevin raised his sword and took a stance, which only irritated Chris further. Not even in his wildest dreams did Chris think he would be forced to duel a complete rookie. What made it worse was the fire burning in the kid's eyes, as if he actually believed he had a shot at winning. If Roman wanted to put him in his place with this match, Chris was determined to deny him that satisfaction. The moment the start signal was shouted, Chris let out all his pent-up rage and lunged forward. Facing such overwhelming speed and power, it was as clear as day that Kevin stood absolutely no chance on his own. But that only applied if this was a fair one-on-one. In this match, Kevin had Roman backing him up. Just before the clash, a voice echoed clearly inside Kevin's mind. Raise your sword to defend your front. Chris is going to launch a surprise attack. There was no mistaking it. That was Roman's voice. He was directing Kevin's every single move. Thanks to this direct guidance, Kevin managed to successfully block Chris's opening strike. Roman then instructed him to take a step to the side and aim for Chris's chest, just as the opponent prepared to throw a kick. Roman saw right through Chris's move, but Kevin's reflexes simply could not keep up. He ended up taking the blow and crashing flat on his back. Roman immediately commanded him to get back up and keep fighting. Meanwhile, Roman continued to feed him silent instructions through telepathy, commanding him to roll to the right. Quick. Without a second thought, Kevin moved instantly. That quick roll to the right narrowly saved him from Chris's next crushing strike. Chris looked visibly stunned that Kevin had managed to dodge. Pivot and aim straight for his left chest, Roman commanded, and Kevin obediently executed the move. Armed with Roman's precise instructions and the solid basics he had drilled over the past week, Kevin's sudden counterattack actually forced Chris to be on guard. However, Chris still possessed vastly superior combat experience. As a result, Kevin's counter was immediately shut down with another heavy kick. He clutched his chest, desperately fighting through the pain. Chris had indeed left an opening just now, but Kevin was simply too slow to capitalize on it, leaving himself wide open to the counter. Block the strike from above, Roman's voice echoed in his head once more. Kevin reflexively raised his sword to defend. Under the crushing pressure of Chris's assault, Roman continued to guide his movements. He tried to dodge to the right to escape, but before Kevin could even react, he took a brutal knee straight to the face. Blood gushed from his nose, and the blinding pain left him completely dazed. As for Chris, he was also starting to run out of breath. Chris had no idea Roman was using mana transmission to guide his opponent, so Kevin's sudden resistance caught him completely off guard. Roman watched closely from the sidelines. He knew Kevin was still no match for Chris, simply because his body couldn't keep up with the mental commands. Meanwhile, Chris's reflexes were incredibly sharp. But still, this whole situation was turning out to be pretty damn interesting. Back in the fight, Kevin was struggling to pull himself back up. Even though he was taking a brutal beating, he felt a surge of excitement seeing young Master Roman pulling the strings. Because even though his opponent was a 2-star Aura Knight, Roman could still predict every single move with absolute precision. Kevin quickly realized the problem was just his physical limits. If he could only move exactly as Roman guided him, defeating Chris was actually within reach. Right now, Chris was nothing more than a puppet in Roman's hands, being played with at the young master's whim. As for Kevin, the guy was incredibly tough. Even after getting absolutely trashed, he still managed to find the strength to stand back up. And with every exchange, Kevin felt his body adapting just a little bit more to Roman's guidance. This was starting to mess with Chris's head. No matter how hard he tried to end the fight, Kevin kept dodging his attacks and even managed to counter at critical moments. To call all of this a mere coincidence was just impossible to believe. On the other hand, Kevin was absolutely thrilled. Even Chris, the most brilliant genius of the Dmitry family's Knight Order, was struggling against Roman's sheer tactical genius. Experiencing his master's terrifying level of skill firsthand, Kevin knew deep down that dedicating his life to this man was the best decision he had ever made. In that very moment, he swore an oath that this was the man he would serve as his master for the rest of his life. No matter how insane or unreasonable Roman's orders might be, he would follow them blindly without a second thought. Kevin's burning desire to become the ultimate sword in Roman's hand grew more intense by the second, and he knew the only way to achieve that was to possess an unbreakable will. Gripping his sword with everything he had, Kevin charged right back into the hopeless fight. Of course, a severe gap in physical speed couldn't be fixed overnight, let alone in a matter of hours during a single duel. So despite Roman's guidance, Kevin was still lagging far behind Chris. As the brutal exchange dragged on, Kevin was beaten half to death. Chris wanted to stop, knowing that if he kept going, he might end up permanently crippling the guy. But the stubborn fool was fighting like he had absolutely nothing to lose. Despite his severe injuries, Kevin refused to back down, yelling to fight to the bitter end. His relentless stubbornness only made Chris's blood boil. Fine. If that's what you really want, I'll give it to you. From now on, every time you look at your shattered arm, you'll regret this day. Chris lunged forward, aiming a devastating blow straight at Kevin's left arm. But at that exact moment, rushing in at full speed left his own chest completely wide open. Instead of telling Kevin to dodge, Roman ordered him to charge straight ahead and strike back with every ounce of strength he had left. Chris never expected such a reckless, suicidal move. He stumbled to the side, barely dodging the incoming strike. But that split-second dodge cost him his momentum, and the onslaught wasn't over yet. Before Chris could even recover his balance, Kevin pressed the attack relentlessly. To Chris, it was a sloppy, desperate move full of openings. Drawing on his 10 years of combat experience, Chris easily avoided the strike. He tried to counter, but Kevin somehow managed to block it. The awkward position unexpectedly put Chris on the defensive. Just when it looked like Kevin might actually pull it off, Chris anticipated his next move and poured all his remaining strength into one final, decisive strike. Kevin's sword went flying, and he collapsed face first onto the ground. Roman watched with a complex, yet slightly satisfied expression. Chris had correctly read Kevin's second attack as a feint and pulled off a perfect counter. You win. As promised, I will personally train you starting tomorrow. This was your choice. Roman tossed those words over his shoulder, then picked up the unconscious Kevin and walked away. Late that afternoon, Chris returned to his room, feeling incredibly frustrated. Why on earth did I even agree to fight that rookie? Chris grumbled to himself. There was absolutely nothing to gain from that match. It was a massive waste of time, and honestly, it felt like a defeat at the very end. Yeah, Chris felt like he had lost. Even though he knocked Kevin out, Kevin's final strike was identical to the move Roman used to defeat him in their sparring match 2 weeks ago. That was a day he would never, ever forget. And if he hadn't experienced that exact move from Roman before, he knew he probably wouldn't have been able to defeat Kevin in that split second. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was as if he only managed to beat a total amateur because of the harsh lesson Roman gave him 2 weeks ago. He let out a self-deprecating laugh. Did I really grow that much from just that one experience? The next morning, Chris arrived at the training ground incredibly early. Even though he had barely slept a wink last night from overthinking, Chris finally made a decision after sorting through all those chaotic thoughts. He wanted to get there early to tell Roman that he did not need any formal lessons. Instead, Chris wanted to find his own path to get stronger, and that path was simply observing Roman. Chris felt like he finally got it after just that one sparring match yesterday. At first, he thought Roman was not helping Kevin, but thinking back, there was no way Kevin could have executed those parries and counterattacks so smoothly all on his own. Looking back, Roman guiding Kevin during that match was actually a way to give Chris a chance to adapt on his own. It was a lesson to help him grow. Roman was definitely no longer the useless young master Chris once knew. Even though he did not know exactly what had happened, Chris knew the young master had reached a completely different level, a level that even Captain Jonathan could not hope to reach. When Roman told him to observe and learn, he meant Chris had to find his own enlightenment by watching him. After all, lessons you figure out yourself stick with you much longer than things you are just handed. That was why Chris made this decision. Roman also seemed pretty pleased that Chris had finally got his head straight. So, he went right back to personally guiding Kevin, while Chris kept watching them from the sidelines. Time flew by, and the day of the social banquet hosted by the Barco family finally arrived. He went on a long journey just to return, though he almost did not make it back alive. This time, his return felt a little different. A week before the banquet, gossip was spreading like wildfire. Hey, did you hear? It is about Roman Dmitry. I heard his engagement to the Lawrence family was broken off. Mocking laughter quickly followed. Well, it is obviously the Lawrence family's fault. Based on the official announcement, another man chimed in, that is just an excuse. He probably just felt sorry for his precious daughter. After seeing what a fool that Dmitry kid is. The scene shifts elsewhere, where a lady sets down her teacup. But breaking off an engagement right when a war with Barco is right around the corner? That just proves the eldest son of the Dmitry family is even worse than the rumors say. Even the servants were whispering. But I also heard rumors that he took down Bloodfang. Hearing this, another maid turned around and scoffed. Oh, please, you actually believe that? It is probably just a story they made up to save face. After getting dumped like that. Cut to another location, where a loud laugh echoes through a grand mansion. Anthony laughed loudly. I can't believe Roman actually broke off this engagement. He is so easy to manipulate. Raising his glass, he asked, did Roman accept our invitation to the upcoming banquet? His servant quickly replied, yes, sir. We have received his confirmation letter. A confirmation letter directly from the Dmitry family. Anthony smirked slyly. Excellent. Excellent. Everything is going perfectly. Taking a sip, he muttered. I really can't wait for next week. It has been a long time since I felt this excited about a party. On the day of the social banquet, Roman called out to Hans, looking thoughtful. He asked, do I really have to wear this? Hans explained. This is your first official social gathering since the engagement was broken off. I can't let you dress casually. Even as Hans babbled on, Roman could only remain silent. Then, Hans's face grew dead serious. But I am sure you won't turn your back on this masterpiece, he said seriously. I poured my heart and soul into making it. It seemed Roman's soft spot had been hit. He sighed in defeat. Fine, I will wear it just to make you happy. Hans beamed. I knew you would say that. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Chris seemed extremely irritated. With a stern face, he grumbled, "What is taking him so long? At this rate, the young master will arrive before us." In the distance, Kevin yelled, "I am so sorry," he quickly explained. "I am still not used to wearing this armor." Chris shook his head helplessly as he looked at Kevin. "How did you end up looking like that?" Kevin replied, flustered. "Well, it is because there was not a single armor set that fit me. Not even in the forge," Chris thought, breaking out in a cold sweat. "Even if he had the young master's help, I still can't believe I almost lost to a guy like this." As Kevin kept complaining, Chris could only watch him with sheer annoyance. He sternly warned him, "Listen closely. Both of us are the young master's retainers. We represent the face of the Dmitry family. It is no exaggeration to say that his reputation will be decided based on our actions. We can't afford to be reckless, so watch your words carefully." Kevin quickly saluted. "Understood. I will keep that in mind." He added, "Sir Knight," which secretly made Chris feel a bit proud. "All right, just ask me if you are unsure about anything." Kevin's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Sir Knight." Chris suddenly barked in frustration. "Your helmet is crooked again," making Kevin let out a sudden yelp. Cut to a grand castle. Elegant music filled the air, blending with the lively chatter of the guests. One man, sipping his wine, asked, "Is Roman really showing up today?" He sneered. "I can't believe he is actually attending Barco's banquet." Especially after breaking off a political marriage he practically begged for, even though he knew full well that Barco was targeting Lawrence. The woman next to him chimed in, "That is why everyone calls him a fool. If he had half a brain, he would have clung to one of the two families. The Dmitry family standing is only crumbling because of Roman," another man agreed. That said, even though Dmitry is the most powerful family in the Northeast, they are being pretty greedy by trying to maintain their ties with the Barco family. But at least he's showing up to make up for his blunder. Over on the other side, someone was keeping a close eye on them. Sophia couldn't help but wonder what kind of man Roman Dmitry actually was. The man standing next to her chimed in, saying she'd find out soon enough. According to him, Roman leaves a terrible impression and is honestly nothing to look at. Apparently, he is incredibly short. The guy mocked how Roman acts so smug just because he is the eldest son of the Dmitry family. The person across from them agreed, saying that if they were a woman, they would do absolutely anything to get out of that engagement. Just then, the butler cleared his throat, interrupting the crowd to introduce the eldest son of the Dmitry family. The doors swung open, and Roman stepped into the banquet hall, radiating pure confidence. Instantly, every eye in the room locked onto him. The crowd erupted into whispers. "Is that really Roman Dmitry? He looks completely different from before. It is practically impossible. What is up with his hair?" Sophia stared at him in disbelief for a moment before making her way toward him. "It is an honor to meet you," Sophia greeted him, bowing politely. "I am Sophia of the Grizel family." She added humbly, "You have probably never heard of us. We are not exactly an illustrious house, but my father, Baron Grizel, has dedicated his life to the Cairo Empire." Roman smiled and replied, "I know the Grizel family very well." Sophia was taken aback. "You actually know about my family?" Roman replied, "How could I not? Your family has stood for centuries." He recalled his butler's words when handing him the papers. "Here is the information on all the northeastern families you requested, young master." Back then, Hans had wondered why he suddenly wanted to look over all of that information. Roman had explained that since he was attending the banquet representing his family, the least he could do was show some basic courtesy. He needed to memorize the backgrounds and heritages of everyone he would meet. Winning people over takes proper effort, after all. He thought to himself that this was especially true for him, the man everyone used to call the fool of the Dmitry family. But out loud he said, "Your family has been settled in the Northeast for quite some time, has it not? The timber from the Grizzle estate is famous throughout the Cairo Empire for its high quality. And I heard your brother recently succeeded in sensing mana." Roman offered his warmest regards, saying, "I sincerely congratulate your brother on such a great achievement." The two of them continued to chat warmly. Seeing this, the two guys from earlier were left completely speechless. What in the world? One of them quickly rushed over to strike up a conversation. "Greetings, Lord Roman Dmitry. I am Manhwa of the Bolt family." Roman smiled faintly. "Well, to think I would be greeted by the eldest son of the Bolt family." Roman praised the man's family, saying, "Didn't Baron Bolt achieve great glory in the recent war? I was deeply moved reading about it. Manya blushed, replying, I am truly honored that you think so highly of us. The two standing behind them also wanted to get close. A young lady stepped forward and greeted him. It has been a while, Lord Roman. You have changed so much. He politely replied, I am nothing compared to you, Lady Eris. You look as beautiful as ever. Then, shifting focus, he asked, How is your mother doing? I heard she has not been feeling well lately. You know, Dmitry benefited greatly from our agreement with the hero's family about 10 years ago. I am also grateful for the goodwill you have shown us, she replied. The conversation between them was flowing perfectly. Another young man chimed in, Lord Roman, it seems I completely misjudged you. I always thought you would be hard to talk to, because you were always drunk. Roman chuckled and replied, Honestly, I could go for a drink right now, but it looks like I will have to stay sober from now on. Just then, the banquet butler approached and called out to him, Lord Roman. He delivered a message, saying, Our young master requests your presence in the back room. Hearing this, Roman's expression darkened. He thought to himself, Well, looks like it is time to find out who has been trying to get under my skin. Outside the palace, Chris scanned the area. The other noble families had massive entourages of knights. Standing next to him, Kevin curiously asked, Sir Knight, what exactly is a banquet? Chris replied, We will never have a chance to step foot inside, so there is no point in worrying about it. Besides, your helmet is crooked again. Seeing them, a passerby took notice and whispered, What is up with that guy? The man next to him sneered. Apparently, he is one of Roman Dmitry's followers. The group began staring at them intensely. Chris kept teasing Kevin, telling him to just take the helmet off, which left the young boy flustered. That is when the other knights started jeering and mocking them relentlessly. I heard rumors that Roman Dmitry is a disgraced eldest son, but I didn't expect him to bring a kid who can't even hold a sword properly. Chris calmly told Kevin, Ignore them. But the bullies only raised their voices, yelling, Well, what do you expect? That is just the level of the Dmitry family. By this point, Kevin was reaching his absolute limit. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the banquet was buzzing with lively, aristocratic energy. Roman stood quietly amidst the crowd of mingling nobles, his eyes drifting forward. It turned out his attention had been captured by a stunning girl with long, flowing golden hair, who was smiling and chatting happily. Her smile was truly breathtaking, lighting up the entire room around her. Just then, Anthony walked up and threw an arm around Roman's shoulder, asking slyly, Who are you staring at so intensely, Roman? Roman slowly turned his head to look at him. Startled, he turned around to greet his friend. With Anthony standing right next to him, Roman quietly asked, Do you know that blonde lady over there? Anthony looked slightly surprised. What do you mean? You don't know her? That's Lady Flora. Yes, it was that very blonde girl with the bright smile who made his young, naive heart flutter. That young lady was Flora. Roman practically engraved the name Flora Lawrence into his mind. His face flushed red, and his heart pounded wildly in his chest. That was the Roman Dmitry from many years ago. But now, Joong Hyuk, occupying Roman's body, was completely different. The moment the room door swung open, Roman, sporting platinum hair and dressed in royal aristocratic attire, walked in and immediately heard his friend calling out to him, Over here, Roman! Anthony, sitting in a chair, looked exactly the same as before. The moment he spotted Roman, he called out enthusiastically, What have you been up to while I wasn't around? Finally, Roman was meeting the person he needed to see. Roman was secretly pleased. So, this guy was Anthony Barco. Sitting in the opposite chair, he kept chattering away, inviting Roman to sit down. I heard rumors that you've changed, but I never expected you to change this much. Hurry up, sit down and tell me everything. Before sitting down, Roman took a quick look around the room. There were still a few half-finished glasses of wine and fruit juice. He quietly noted that these traces clearly showed other people had just been there. An empty wine bottle lying on the floor under the table further confirmed his suspicion that people had indeed just left. He wondered if the real reason Anthony had kicked everyone out before he arrived was because he had a secret to share. Roman smiled to himself, thinking that if that was the case, he should put him at ease. He then gently replied, I'm not really sure myself. Sitting down, he relaxed his arm on the backrest to chat with Anthony. I spent a fortune to change myself. And now, I keep changing every day, even when I don't do a single thing. With that, Roman's handsome face smirked. But honestly, I'm really glad to see you again. Anthony didn't reply. His emerald green eyes flickered with a strange, unpredictable look, but he quickly regained his usual mischievous demeanor, swiftly pouring a glass of wine while continuing to chatter. I guess I just can't see it in a positive light. To be honest, I have no idea what you were thinking back then. Roman accepted the wine glass and softly repeated, "Back then?" Anthony chuckled slightly as he brought up a rather unpleasant memory. "You know, back when you were forced to choose between a political marriage with the Lawrence family and our friendship, and you ended up getting caught sleeping with my cousin in the warehouse." Hearing him bring up that story, along with his vague, suggestive remarks, made Roman feel a bit uncomfortable. While Roman remained silent, Anthony kept talking, making no effort to hide his sheer contempt. "Sure, secrets are usually kept tight at social banquets, but I still can't believe you went that far right before your own wedding." Anthony smiled slightly, testing Roman. "So, is accepting my invitation to this banquet your way of saying yes to my proposal? If so, I'll keep this whole matter a secret."